Was I expelled from Hogwarts? Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction. So don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 676 The Amazing Bouncing Bulb. Because of the Triwizard Tournament, Professor Grappland gave Rolf and Sherry extra time to practice. The merfolk were delighted. They, too, had a love of beauty, and their eyes were already smitten with Rolf. However, they quickly regretted it, because during practice, Rolf not only used the leg loss charm but also tried other spells, causing them considerable pain, showing no mercy whatsoever. After the protection of magical creatures class ended, Rolf and Sherry parted ways, heading to the greenhouse with the Hufflepuff students. At the greenhouse entrance, the young wizards were still discussing their new protection of magical creatures teacher. Hearing the badgers chatter, Harry frowned and asked, Professor Wilmina Grappland has a new teacher for protection of magical creatures. Yes, Professor Wilmina Grappland, Justin said. What about Hagrid? Harry asked, surprised. Where did he go? I don't know. Professor Grapple said Hagrid was sick. Justin shrugged. But everyone knows he must have been influenced by Rita Skeeter's article to skip class. Harry and Ron exchanged a knowing glance. They had been affected too. That morning at the Great Hall, Colin Creevey had come to comfort Harry, telling him to be strong and not lose hope just because Ron had cheated on him. Ron, walking down the street, had also received the same stares as Harry, but these were all strange looks, pointing and whispering about his teacher-student relationship with Snape. Forget Hagrid, neither of them wanted to go to class. How's the new teacher? Parvati Petier inquired curiously. Is she another weirdo? No, Susan shook her head. Professor Grappland is a very gentle and patient teacher, that's right, Hannah nodded in agreement. Next class, she's taking us to see a newborn unicorn cub. A unicorn cub? Parvati Petier immediately became excited. This is the kind of magical creatures protection class I envision. We should be around dignified and beautiful animals like unicorns, not monsters like the Blastale. Parvati's words were unanimously agreed upon, and many hoped that Professor Grappland would stay, not just temporarily substitute. Hearing these comments, Harry angrily asked, what about Hagrid? What can he do? Parvati said coldly. He can just resign and continue being his gamekeeper. Hagrid didn't do anything wrong. Why should he resign? Harry shouted angrily. He didn't do anything wrong, Parvati shrieked, retorting. Rita Skeeter's article already states that a Blastale is a hybrid of a manticore and a fire crab, which is illegal. Hagrid not only broke the law, but he also forced us to raise Blastales just because he likes them. He's not a qualified professor at all. What he teaches in class is only to satisfy his personal whims. Harry, I know you like Hagrid, but that doesn't mean everyone else has to like him like you, and you shouldn't impose your preferences on others. Harry was speechless, his face flushed red under everyone's gaze. Ron glanced fearfully at Parvati, suspecting she was retaliating for what happened at the Christmas ball. Harry had invited her to be his partner, and at the ball, she had only danced perfunctorily before sitting down to rest, then kept staring at Joe. Such behavior was indeed extremely insulting to a girl, and retaliation was to be expected. Just as tensions were rising, Professor Sprout arrived, carrying a large bunch of keys. She opened the greenhouse door, and everyone filed in. Hermione, walking beside Ralph, whispered, is the new professor of magical creatures really that amazing? Yes, Ralph nodded. Grapple taught us about mermaids. There's a lot I didn't even know. Mermaids? Hermione raised an eyebrow, thoughtfully asking, she taught you how to deal with mermaids? That's right, Ralph chuckled. Calm down, cheating is a Triwizard Tournament tradition, led by Sprout. The students quickly arrived at an open space. There stood an intricately patterned trellis, entwined with vines and hanging with dewy, unripe fruit. The plants themselves were unremarkable, but strangely, they were secured to the trellis by chains, as if to prevent them from escaping. Does anyone know what kind of magical plant this is? Professor Sprout asked. Hermione, who was discussing mermaids with Ralph, quickly raised her hand. Miss Granger, bouncing bulbs, Hermione answered quickly. They like to jump around with oil in them, so they were usually secured with ropes or chains. That's right, 2 points for Gryffindor, Professor Sprout said softly. Your task today is to change the chains on the bouncing bulbs so they have more room to grow, but you must be very careful. Don't hurt the magical plants, they're fragile and precious, aren't you, Professor Sprout? Macmillan said mischievously. Of course not, Mr. Macmillan, Professor Sprout winked and smiled. I meant you must be very careful not to get hurt by the bouncing bulbs, they're very aggressive, really? Macmillan looked incredulous. Can anyone give Mr. Macmillan an example? Sprout looked at Ralph and called on him, Mr. Scamander. In the early days of Quidditch, many wizards used bouncing bulbs instead of golden flying spears. Ralph thought for a moment and said, once, in a Quidditch tournament held in the Philippines, a Serbian player was hit in the chest by a bouncing bulb. Because of the lack of timely treatment, he had to have a kidney removed. Hearing that a bouncing bulb had caused a kidney loss, the students gasped and involuntarily took a few steps back. That was incredibly dangerous. You must all remember, a cat chained is never a good cat, and this rule also applies to magical plans, Professor Sprout said. The students all memorized this wise saying. Seeing the young wizard's fearful face, Professor Sprout smiled and reassured him, don't worry too much. These bouncy bulbs aren't mature yet, and they're not that dangerous. I've also prepared some good things for you. Following Professor Sprout's finger, the young wizard saw a pile of brightly colored helmets in the corner. Only helmets, Professor? Justin asked. No armor or anything like that. You don't need those, Professor Sprout smiled. As long as you protect your heads and avoid fatal injuries, even if the other injuries are serious, Madame Pomfrey can save you. It's a minor problem. Chapter 677 Rogue's Herbal List. Harry, clutching a worn-out helmet, stood with Ron beside a bouncing bulb. Harry still held the key, but instead of immediately unlocking the chain on the bouncy bulb, he asked in a low voice, Ron, do you think Hagrid will be expelled? Hard to say. Ron put on his dark green helmet, tugged at the new chain in his hand, and said, don't forget, last year Hagrid was complained about by Malfoy for having a hippogriff and was questioned by the Ministry of Magic, but Ron cleared his name. Harry retorted. Hagrid was innocent, I know, but the board won't see it that way. They won't care about the details, they'll just think. Ron sighed, why is it always Hagrid who causes trouble? When I was little, my mother told me that giants are extremely ferocious, and Hagrid is a half-giant. After seeing the reports, parents won't allow him to continue as the professor of magical creatures. Hagrid isn't ferocious at all, Harry said angrily. That's all Rita Skeeter's nonsense. Harry, keep your voice down. Ron looked up and glanced furtively at Professor Sprout, who was talking to Hufflepuff students and hadn't noticed them. He lowered his voice and continued, we know Hagrid isn't vicious, but those parents don't. They'll only believe Skeeter's rumors. Like how she spread the rumor that we two had, you know, with Snape. It's clearly false, but Seamus and Dean believed it. Harry paused for a moment and said, Dumbledore would definitely try to keep Hagrid, right? Hagrid has always been so dedicated and responsible. Ron's lips twitched. Not to mention that Dumbledore was also rumored to be Hagrid's bastard son. He himself would have to avoid suspicion. Most importantly, Hagrid was dedicated and responsible. How could Harry say that? If Hagrid were truly responsible, he wouldn't have let them raise a Blastale for half a year. So, Ron secretly wanted to replace Hagrid, so that he would be much safer in his magical creatures class. However, he didn't say it aloud, especially given Harry's anger. Ron decided it was best to avoid the topic. After a moment's thought, he asked, Harry, how did that nasty woman find out Hagrid was a half-giant? Did Hagrid tell her? No way, Harry said angrily. He's kept it from us all this time. Why would he tell Rita Skeeter? She must have some special methods, Ron said, fiddling with the chains in his hands. That night Snape took me to his office, and I didn't see Skeeter at all, but she knew about it. Maybe she has an invisibility cloak too, Harry guessed. She's capable of doing something like that, isn't she? Wearing an invisibility cloak and eavesdropping in a corner. It's a pity we don't have Mad-Eye Moody's mystic eyes, Ron said regretfully. I heard my father say that his mystic eyes can even see through invisibility cloaks. Maybe you could talk to Dumbledore and ask him to borrow Moody's eyes. A cold voice suddenly rang in their ears. Stop talking. Harry and Ron jumped, looking up to see Professor Sprout, who had somehow circled around to their side. Professor Sprout glared at them, her expression stern. The other students have already started working on it. Scamander and Miss Granger have even changed the chains. And you're still chatting here? 10 points deducted from Gryffindor. Harry and Ron turned to look, and sure enough, Ron and Hermione were easily wrapping the newly chained bouncy bulbs around the flower stand. "Alright, Professor. Let's get started." Harry picked up the key, inserted it into the lock, and while Sprout turned away, continued, "Ron, we both have to go see Hagrid and tell him we want him back. Everyone wants him back to teach." Ron untied the chains binding the bouncy bulb and reluctantly advised, "Harry, to be honest, Hagrid might want to rest for a while. Let's go find him." Harry glared at him angrily, and Ron quickly changed his tune, "But I personally definitely want Hagrid back to teaching immediately. I'll go with you to find him." Harry nodded in satisfaction, absent-mindedly untying the chains while thinking about how to persuade Hagrid once they found him. Suddenly, the bouncy bulb wriggled free from Harry's grasp and bounced heavily onto Ron's face. Ron felt a wave of dizziness and fell to the ground. "Ron, are you alright?" Harry bent down and helped him up. Ron felt his nose break. He touched it, blood was seeping out. He yelled, "The bouncy bulb's gone." Harry then realized the bouncy bulb was leaping into the air. He grabbed a thin vine, but the force pulled him down, slamming him to the ground. Harry clung to the vine, his body tumbling across the ground like a wave before finally coming to a stop against a flower stand. Not only them, but many bouncy bulbs had broken free of the young wizard's restraints, bouncing around the room. Some bouncy bulbs bounced high into the air, slamming into the young wizards' heads, making their helmets clang loudly. Justin and Macmillan sat on a restless bouncy bulb, trying to stop it from escaping. Justin shouted, "Ron, why is your bouncy bulb so obedient? The bouncy bulb is afraid of fire." "You have to use fire to deal with it," Ron said, snapping his fingers. A fireball floated up, hovering near the bouncy bulb under Justin's bottom. Within seconds, they both felt the vines, avoiding the flames, slowly cease struggling. Seeing this, the other students raised their wands. Hannah also drew her wand, waving it and shooting a bluebell flower-like flame at a bouncy bulb. However, her flame was too large, directly igniting the vine. Neville, startled, quickly used spring water to extinguish the fire. Professor Sprout watched the scene speechlessly. This was why she hadn't mentioned the bouncy bulbs were afraid of fire. She feared these little rascals would set the greenhouse ablaze. Just then, the culprit, Ralph, approached with a smile. "Professor Sprout, I have a favor to ask you." "What is it?" Sprout asked. "I already know the details of the second event in the Triwizard Tournament. Now I need to brew the antidote," Ralph said, looking troubled. "But I lack the herbs, and there might not be enough time to buy them now. I am, after all, a Hufflepuff student. If we win, it will be an honor for our school. I was wondering if you could ask me for some herbs. You wouldn't refuse, would you?" "Alright," Professor Sprout readily agreed, asking, "What herbs do you need?" "Not many, just these." "Oh, and there's something written on the back too." Ralph pulled out a sheet of A4-sized parchment, handed it over, and said earnestly, "If I win, you'll deserve a third of the credit." Chapter 678 Snape Digging a Hole. Professor Sprout glanced at the two sides of Ralph's parchment covered in herbs and immediately sensed something fishy. The amount of herbs was enough to open a pharmacy in Diagon Alley, and many of them were completely unnecessary for the Triwizard Tournament. For example, Piper's herb, a material specifically for Felix Felicis, and two-eared herb and sapwort, used to brew Polyjuice potion. Could these potions even be used in the Triwizard Tournament? Yet Sprout still efficiently provided Ralph with all the herbs, even giving him a little extra. Her reasoning was simple. Most of the magical plants grown in the greenhouse, after being harvested, were taken by Professor Snape. Snape's reasons were also valid. He needed herbs for teaching potions to the students and for brewing potions for the school hospital. But Professor McGonagall had done the math for Snape. The students and the hospital didn't need so many herbs. Where did all the extras go? They went into Professor Snape's personal storage room, of course. So, rather than letting Snape benefit, Sprout thought it better to give it to Ralph. After all, he was a student of their own house. It's better to keep the good stuff in the family. Besides, wasn't this also responding to Dumbledore's hint to help the Hogwarts champions cheat and gain an advantage in the Triwizard Tournament? In fact, Grubland and Professor Sprout weren't the only teachers secretly helping the champions. In Charms class, Professor Flitwick specifically taught several water spells. Most spells work in air, and their effectiveness is greatly reduced underwater. Professor Flitwick's Spiral Water Arrow spell, however, could utilize river water to enhance its power. In Transfiguration class, Professor McGonagall even demonstrated transfiguration, a spell only taught to 6th-year students. She didn't expect these 4th-year wizards to learn it. She mainly wanted to teach the champions that even just conjuring gels would allow them to breathe underwater. Even Professor Bubbagee, who did Muggle research, was leading the young wizards in developing underwater mines. According to her, this type of mine destroyed the $1 billion Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser USS Princeton during the Gulf War a few years ago. Its effect was phenomenal. While the teachers were helping the warriors, Hagrid still hadn't appeared. He stopped eating in the Great Hall and didn't show up at the game field to fulfill his duties as a keeper. Hagrid had completely disappeared from Hogwarts. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said Hagrid had been dismissed from the school, losing even his position as game field keeper. Others said he had been imprisoned in Azkaban. Malfoy was the most smug, swaggering around the campus as if he were the one who had driven Hagrid away. In fact, Malfoy had indeed given Rita's interview, saying many bad things about Hagrid. Harry and Ron were planning revenge. Besides Hagrid, Snape was also heavily influenced by Rita Skeeter's writings. During Friday's potions class, Snape, wearing his black robes, explained the stamina potion in the classroom. A gray owl suddenly flew in from outside, followed by 4 barn owls, a 10 owl, and a gray woodland owl. They all jostled and pushed their way forward, eager to be the first to deliver the letter to Snape. Snape took the letter from the gray owl, read it, his face darkening. He then waved his wand and burned the letter. He opened another letter and immediately threw it away. The letter landed on the ground, spurting out a yellowish-green liquid with a pungent gasoline smell. Everyone recognized it as undiluted pus from a babbler tuber, which would cause serious skin damage if touched directly. The students, seeing this, quickly backed away. More and more owls flew in, hundreds of letters being hurled at Snape like bullets. Snape, enraged, waved his wand, shooing the owls away. Ralph quietly picked up a letter. Upon opening it, he found a dead rat inside. Snape, you morally corrupt teacher, you're like a rat in the sewers. Weasley is my brother Harry Potter's true love, don't interfere in their relationship. He picked up another letter, opened it, and read, Snape, I read in the newspaper that you're seducing Harry Potter's girlfriend. That boy has already suffered so much, and you're still so despicable. I have connections in the Ministry of Magic, and I've already found out your address. You better watch out, or I'll run you over with my muggle truck. Ralph and Sherry exchanged bewildered glances. They hadn't expected the idol worship in the wizarding world to be so extreme. It was terrifying. Snape finally chased the owl away, his dark eyes sweeping over the students' faces. The young wizards trembled, afraid to look him in the eye, lest they be implicated. Just when everyone thought Snape was about to explode, he calmed down and suddenly asked, Scamander, what's the way if I want to stay underwater for a long time? Ralph hesitated for a moment, then stood up and slowly replied, you can use the bubble head charm, Jilbajil, or take a refuge potion. The bubble head charm is easily punctured by weapons, Snape scoffed. Jilbajil comes from the Mediterranean and is hard to find in England. As for the refuge potion, it takes over 5 months to brew and the process is complicated, so it's not practical. Snape rejected all of Ralph's suggestions, finally sneering, I won't teach you stamina potions this lesson. I'll teach you how to brew a simple water-breathing potion. After taking it, you can breathe underwater for a long time. Ralph was stunned. He thought Snape would immediately go and cause trouble for Harry and Ron. Why was he starting to teach them how to get through the second project? But the boy then became confused. He remembered that taking a water-breathing potion only allowed him to stay underwater for a maximum of 40 minutes, which wasn't considered a long time. For the second event of the Triwizard Tournament, the potion's effects might not last long enough. Had Snape improved the water-breathing potion again, greatly extending the diving time? Just as Ralph was wondering, Snape waved his wand, and the ingredients and brewing method appeared on the blackboard. Ralph stared at the blackboard and saw that the ingredients, hellwort, blaze powder, and pufferfish, were exactly the same as the ingredients he remembered, and the brewing steps were unchanged. The boy raised his hand to ask a question, but Snape glared at him, his eyes filled with a strong threat, and said fiercely, What, Scamander, do you have a problem with the potion I teach you? Ralph quickly shook his head and sat back down on his stool. He stared at the potion on the blackboard, thinking to himself, Snape really is setting a trap, how ruthless. Chapter 679 The Death of Nymeria. As dinner began, news of Snape being cyberbullied by Harry's fans via mail spread throughout Hogwarts. Everyone sat at their tables, eating their dinner while gleefully watching Snape in the faculty section. Unfortunately, he still had that sallow, lifeless face, showing no sign of flushing or depression. Harry hadn't expected Rita Skeeter's fabricated article to have such an effect, which made him, who was initially annoyed, quite happy. It seemed having many fans wasn't such a bad thing after all. Maybe he should offer Skeeter an interview next time, giving a full-blown rant about Snape, letting the fans intensify their attacks, ideally making him too afraid to come to class? Harry was daydreaming when he suddenly noticed Snape staring at him. They exchanged a quick glance, and Snape gave him a cold smile. Harry jolted awake, instantly snapping back to reality. Snape might simply ignore fan mail, they couldn't exactly confront him and hurl insults. But Harry was different, he was right in front of Snape. So the question arises, who'll Snape vent his anger on? The answer is obvious. Harry was right, Snape had indeed dug a pit for him, waiting for him to fall in. Snape was confident Harry would, after all, he inherited James Potter's arrogance and foolishness. Ralph wasn't too concerned about this, his attention was more focused on the antidote for the lobotomides. With Professor Sprout's help, he had no shortage of herbs, but he lacked some magical creature materials. So, after dinner, under the cover of darkness, Ralph and Sherry quietly left the castle and headed for the Forbidden Forest. Passing Hagrid's cabin, Ralph stopped in midair, peering into the house with his magic eye, but saw nothing, not even Baskerville. It was one thing if he wasn't home during the day, but where had Hagrid gone in the middle of the night? Sherry, riding a flying broomstick, flew in from afar and hovered in front of the boy, saying softly, "Ruff, those blast-tailed snails aren't in the pumpkin patch anymore." Blast-tailed snails too, Ruff pondered, then slowly said, Hagrid couldn't have taken those dangerous creatures too far, nor could he have gone to a populated area. The girl with the ponytail looked at the deep forest and said, then he can only be in the Forbidden Forest. That's right, Ruff agreed, the eight-eyed spiders should know his location. Let's go find Aragog. A firebolt shot upwards, carrying the boy and instantly piercing the night sky. Sherry also spurred her broomstick, following him into the clouds. The two rode their flying broomsticks, galloping through the dense Forbidden Forest, soon arriving at a wide pit. The trees in the pit had been cleared away, leaving only a huge, spherical spider web, densely covered with eight-eyed spiders. A young eight-eyed spider, barely half a person's height, saw Ralph and Sherry, its eyes gleaming with excitement. It waved its large pincers, and cried out, humans, humans, fresh, tender human flesh to eat again. Harry, a swarm of giant eight-eyed spiders, hearing the commotion, raised their heads, eyeing the unexpected treat. The larger spiders remained motionless upon seeing Ralph, but the smaller spiders were already clicking excitedly, seemingly eager for a delicious meal. Ralph, perched on a firebolt, called out, Aragog, is this how you control your clan? From the center of the massive web, a spider the size of an Asian elephant slowly emerged. Its body and legs were blackish-gray, and its eyes, previously clouded, were now fully clear. Aragog apologized to Ralph, Mr. Scamander, Agira is only 2 months old and has never seen you before, so I don't know your identity. Ralph gave a curto. I will definitely keep it strictly under control from now on, Aragog hurriedly promised. I won't let this happen again. Aragog didn't want to punish Agira, at least not now. It still wanted to save face in front of its clan. Ralph, however, didn't give it that face, coldly sneering, your clan's first reaction upon seeing us is to eat human flesh? You can imagine what they're like on a daily basis. Aragog, when I released you, I told you not to eat humans again, especially Hogwarts students. It seems you really ignored me. Ralph suddenly raised his arm, a long, thin spider silk whistling through the air, instantly wrapping around the clamoring eight-eyed spitterling. With a pull, he dragged it towards him. The spitterling tried to sting Ralph's arm, but he easily dodged, then with a sharp twist, cleanly snapped off its large pincers. The young spider, writhing in pain, let out a mournful howl. Ralph's eyes flashed with a serpentine light as he coldly uttered, death gaze. The struggling spider saw the boy's magical eyes, its own eyes widening instantly. The next second, its body stiffened, and it died abruptly. Ralph tossed the spider onto his web, smiling slightly. Aragog, I cured your eyes and your illness, and I even extended your lifespan. But since I gave you these things, I can take them back. I don't want to hear about cannibalism again next time I come, understand? Aragog, drenched in sweat, lowered his head, avoiding the boy's gaze, and humbly said, I understand. Please calm your anger, find me some materials for magical creatures, Ralph said. I need a lemur fish, a large elk, and 5 chameleon snails. I need them now. Upon hearing this, Aragog immediately dispatched his tribe to search for them. There's one more thing, Ralph said, looking at Aragog. Send a giant spider that knows the way to lead us to Hagrid. Aragog remembered Hagrid's instructions not to reveal his location to anyone, including Headmaster Dumbledore. Aragog had indeed promised Hagrid then, but this time it didn't hesitate at all and said, yes, I'll have my child take you there right now. Through waist-high grass and piles of dead leaves, a giant spider scurried forward, working incredibly hard, as if a second later it would be killed by the vicious boy close behind. Scamander had killed a giant spider right in front of Aragog, and Aragog hadn't dared to utter a sound, let alone its life was at stake. However, upon reaching a valley, the giant spider finally stopped, not daring to take another step. Hagrid is in the valley, what's in there? Ralph asked. Are you so scared? The man-headed lion-bodied scorpion-tailed beast that Hagrid took in lives in the valley, the giant spider said, trembling. She's terrifying, she often comes out to eat us. Ralph and Sherry exchanged a glance. So, the mother of the exploding tail snail, the man-headed lion-bodied scorpion-tailed beast, was kept here by Hagrid. Ralph shouted into the valley, Hagrid, are you there? A roar immediately echoed from within the valley, and soon a light appeared. Ralph and Sherry also heard a familiar voice calling out, Ralph, is that you? It's me. Hagrid's figure gradually became clearer, revealing his large, bearded face. He was holding an oil lamp, which he swayed in midair. He saw Ralph and Sherry and glared at them. Oh, you runaway Gorgons. What are you two doing in the Forbidden Forest? Do you even know what time it is? Sherry and I came to gather some magical materials, Ralph chuckled, and also to look for you. Yes, the girl with the ponytail nodded. We were worried because you hadn't shown up at school, Hagrid sighed. I did something stupid and got Dumbledore into trouble. I'm too scared to go back. You two shouldn't be here, Hagrid added. Hurry back to school. It's dangerous in the Forbidden Forest lately. Those centaurs have gone mad. Centaurs? Ralph frowned. What happened? Bane's fiancée who ran away from her wedding 3 years ago? Nymeria, Hagrid said seriously. She's dead. Chapter 680 Rav, take one step forward and die. Hearing Hagrid's words, Ralph and Sherry were stunned. They hadn't seen her for a whole Christmas holiday, and Nymeria was dead? This news was too outrageous. She's really dead? Ralph asked in a low voice. Hagrid, did you see it with your own eyes? No, not really. Hagrid shook his head. I heard from the centaurs last night that they ambushed Nymeria in a place she was sure to pass through, and Bane shot her in the chest with an arrow. Ambushed? Ralph looked astonished. That's impossible. Nymeria can divine. She said her divination abilities were better than any other centaur. If centaurs were really ambushing her, she would have divined the information beforehand and avoided the danger. I'm not entirely sure either. Hagrid held up his oil lamp and looked up at the sky. Ronan told me that Bane used a forbidden object from the centaur tribe, which seemed to be able to interfere with Nymeria's divination results. A forbidden object, Ralph pondered. What forbidden object was so powerful that it could interfere with Nymeria's divination? He thought for a moment, then continued, didn't Ronan come to warn me before it happened? Yes, Ronan came once during Christmas, Hagrid said with a bitter face. He said he was going to be confined by the tribe and would have a hard time getting out, and he told me to go find you, to save Nymeria, but I wasn't at Hogwarts during Christmas. Ralph sighed. Yes, Hagrid nodded. You weren't at school, and Dumbledore wasn't there either. I couldn't find you, and I didn't know Nymeria's location, so I couldn't contact her. And what about after school started? Sherry pressed. Rita Skeeter's article really bothered me. I hid in the Forbidden Forest, drinking all day to numb myself, and I forgot about it, Hagrid said shamefully. Until tonight, when I met Farenzer, and he said Bane shot Nymeria dead with an arrow. I remembered it. Ralph, what do we do now? Sherry asked softly. Ralph rubbed his cheeks and said slowly, we need to find her alive or dead. We need to find Nymeria. Hagrid, do you know where they ambushed Nymeria? Ralph asked. Farenzer told me it was at the foot of Brown Hole, Hagrid said. Brown Hole? The girl with the ponytail raised an eyebrow and whispered, Ralph, I remember that's where we rescued the winged bird that night. That's right, Ralph nodded, and also where Nymeria is hiding. If Nymeria had managed to escape back up the mountain after the ambush, she might not have been captured and taken back to the Centaur tribe yet. After all, the numerous magical items she received from Ralph were used as traps hidden along the mountain paths. Ralph and Sherry returned to their flying broomsticks. The boy tapped the firebolt and said, "We're leaving now, Hagrid." Hagrid watched the two soar higher and higher in a panic. He suddenly realized that something terrible might be about to happen tonight. Hagrid wanted to go to Hogwarts to find Dumbledore. But it was too far from the school, and he couldn't apparate. By the time he found Dumbledore, it would be too late. Hagrid had no choice but to return to the valley, summon the Sphinx and the blast-tailed snails, and head to Brownhole Mountain. No matter what happened tonight, he had to lend a hand. Brownhole Mountain, a group of centaurs climbed the mountain path slowly, stopping frequently. It wasn't that they were exhausted, but the path was rugged and difficult. In some places, it was so narrow that they had to press their backs against a cold stone, dragging themselves inch by inch like crabs. Some paths, though wide, could suddenly reveal deep, swallowing holes. Besides, there were countless magical artifacts hidden in the shadows, which could be triggered carelessly. Weak ones would emit smoke and stench, while stronger ones would explode, causing rocks to fall. Bane gazed towards the mountain top, surrounded by silence and darkness, devoid of any light or shadow. A fierce wind swept through, chilling him to the bone. He said impatiently, "It's too slow, Bane." "Don't worry, Nymeria won't escape," Margaret advised. "Even if she does, your arrow is coated with the venom of the chameleon snail. Several hours have passed, the venom will have seeped into her bones, and she'll surely die." "I'm just afraid Nymeria will die," Bane said viciously. That would be too easy on her. 3 years ago, his elopement had caused Bane to lose face in front of his tribe. Do you know how he'd endured those 3 years? Therefore, after shooting Nymeria, Bane, though he could have fired a second arrow, didn't, fearing she would die on the spot. Bane wanted to capture Nymeria alive, take her back to the tribe, imprison her, and slowly torture her. Of course, he regretted it now. If he had known there were so many traps on the mountain, he would have shot Nymeria dead immediately. Margaret, watching Bane's increasingly extreme stance, sighed softly. Arranged marriages were the bane of centaurs. If Bane's uncle hadn't forced Nymeria to marry him, this wouldn't have happened. Just then, another explosion rang out, and a purple flame suddenly rose, dancing and crackling on the mountain path. The light forced Bane to shield his eyes. He angrily exclaimed, "These are all wizard's items. Scamander must have given them to Nymeria. I knew they were having an affair. Nymeria's elopement back then must have been because of that boy." Margaret, however, didn't think so. When Nymeria eloped, Scamander was only an 11-year-old pony. Even with his exceptional talent, he couldn't ride a horse as large as Nymeria. Nymeria's elopement certainly had nothing to do with him. However, as Scamander grew up, he was now indeed capable of riding. Thinking of this, Margaret felt even more sorry for Bane. The mountain path was cleared again, and the centaurs continued their ascent, quickly reaching the summit. In the distance, they saw a cave with numerous icicles hanging from its ceiling, resembling white fangs. At the cave entrance lay Nymeria, her condition unclear, whether dead or unconscious. Bane, overjoyed, rushed towards Nymeria when suddenly a whooshing sound echoed through the sky. 2 flying brooms sliced through the air, hurtling towards the summit. Bane's pupils contracted sharply. He swiftly drew an arrow from his quiver, drew his bow, and fired a powerful shot towards Nymeria. The icicles above the cave fell, striking the arrow precisely and deflecting it, before it flew back towards Bane. His first arrow had failed. Bane drew his greatsword and swung it with tremendous force, slicing the icicle in two in an instant. The deflected arrow flew back, aiming for Bane's neck. Bane dodged with a scramble, and looking up again, he saw a handsome young man riding a fire crossbow, accompanied by a stunningly beautiful girl with a ponytail. The two hovered in midair, looking down at the centaurs. Ralph tapped his middle finger against his thumb, and a volley of arrows floated in the air, aimed at Bane's head. He coldly said, "Take another step, and die." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 681, The Centaur Who Surrendered. Ralph, alone, blocked all the centaurs. He glanced sideways at Nymeria, who lay on the ground, her life hanging in the balance. Beneath her, a large pool of blood had accumulated, a horrifying sight. Sherry, carrying a black trunk, rushed to Nymeria's side and began to examine her injuries. Seeing this, Bane angrily demanded, "Scamander, what are you trying to do?" Ralph looked at Bane, a moment of disbelief crossing his face. In his memory, Bane wasn't very old, his glossy black fur gave him a wild, untamed look. But now, his face was ashen, showing signs of age, and his fur was mostly white. Bane seemed to have aged 20 years overnight. "Bane, it's only been 6 months, what happened to you?" Ralph asked, frowning. "None of your business." Bane avoided the boy's gaze and angrily questioned, "What exactly do you want here?" "What do we want?" Ralph tilted his head toward Nymeria and said, "It's simple, I'm taking Nymeria away." If it were before, he would never have come to rescue Nymeria. Although they had cooperated before, and it had been relatively pleasant, that was about it. They weren't even friends. Ralph would never stand against the Centaur tribe for her sake. But ever since Newt told him that the Centaur tribe had that wooden coffin, Nymeria had become very important to Ralph. At least she couldn't die now. Hearing that Ralph was going to take his former fiancée away so casually, Bane was enraged. He raised his greatsword again, but Margaret stopped him, saying in a deep voice, "Scamander, wizards and centaurs don't interfere with each other. This is a rule established 10,000 years ago, and it's engraved on a stone tablet. You may not know it, but you can ask your grandfather Newt. He saw that stone tablet in the shrine of the Centaur tribe." "I know," Ralph smiled. 10,000 years ago, a war broke out within the Allied forces, and the Centaurs switched sides to the wizards' camp. One of the conditions was to maintain the Centaurs' independence and not interfere with each other's internal affairs. "Since you know that, step aside and don't interfere with us enforcing our tribal rules," Margaret said. "I haven't finished speaking yet," Ralph waved his hand. "I heard from Lady Bathilda Baggett that there's a supplementary agreement to this non-interference treaty. When both wizards and centaurs are involved, both races must manage it jointly. Am I right, Chief Margaret?" "Yes," Margaret nodded. "But when we dealt with Nymeria, where did wizards come into play?" "Of course not," Ralph grinned. "But another matter involves me." "What matter?" "Last time I came to the Forbidden Forest, Nymeria attacked me and stole a whole bunch of valuable magical items," Ralph said with a fuming expression. "When I just arrived, I heard explosions on the mountain path. Those were all my magical items, stolen by Nymeria. Therefore, according to the agreement from 10,000 years ago, I must take Nymeria away, and I sincerely invite you to come to the Ministry of Magic to jointly investigate this matter." "Nonsense!" Bane's eyes blazed with fury. "You're spouting nonsense. Those magical items were all given to Nymeria by you. You two have clearly been having an affair all along." Hearing this, the centaurs erupted in whispers. It turned out that their tribe's most beautiful female centaur had been stolen away by this little pony. Even Sherry, who was examining Nymeria's injuries, couldn't help but glance over. "Bane, you can drink potions however you want, but you can't say whatever you want." "I have absolutely no relation to your fiancée," Ralph said expressionlessly. "You're not going to pin her running away from the wedding on me, are you?" Before Bane could speak, Margaret snapped, "Shut up, Bane. Don't you think you're shameful enough?" Margaret then looked at Ralph and said, "Nymeria is one of my people. Although she was banished for running away from the wedding, since it was theft, we're willing to compensate her, so, whatever magical items she stole from you, I'll accept them and pay you back in gold at market value. How about that, generous?" Ralph clicked his tongue. "As expected of the Centaur chieftain, since you've said so, I'll definitely agree. Then this matter ends here," Margaret said. "I'm taking Nymeria with me." "Still no," Ralph shook his head. "Although this matter is settled, Bane just slandered me, saying that I had an affair with his former fiancée, Nymeria." Ralph looked at Bane, a smirk playing on his lips, and said in a slightly mocking tone, "I request that the Ministry of Magic and you investigate this matter. If my innocence is proven, Bane must apologize to me." Bane stomped his hind legs furiously on the ground, roaring, "Bah! I will never apologize to you. You heard that, Chief Margaret?" Ralph sighed. "It's not that I'm making things difficult for you, it's Bane who slandered me. In that case, I can only take Nymeria with me. I will definitely deliver the invitation to the joint trial to you. It will not violate the agreement between centaurs and wizards." After speaking, Ralph turned and walked towards Nymeria. Bane was blinded by rage. He roared, took out the horn bow, and pulled a feathered arrow from Margaret's quiver, drawing the bowstring to its fullest extent. A specially crafted iron arrow, carrying the force of wind and thunder, whistled towards the obstructive figure. Ralph didn't dodge. Instead, he turned, raised his arm, and extended a single finger. The feathered arrow, hurtling through the air, was stopped by Ralph's finger. The powerful arrow shattered in midair, while the boy's finger remained unharmed. The centaurs stared in disbelief. A human body could block an arrow. Was that really human skin, or dragon scales? Bane's eyes blazed with madness. He drew his sword recklessly and charged towards Ralph. A piercing scream. Suddenly, Ralph let out a shrill, mournful cry, like that of a harbinger of dread. The cry sounded like a mournful wailing, filling the centaurs with nausea and fear. Bane was also shaken, his heart filled with indescribable terror. Ralph leaped to Bane, landing squarely on the hilt of the unsheathed greatsword. He then lifted his foot, as if ascending a step, causing the sword to tilt and embed itself halfway into the ground. The boy stood on the hilt, coldly staring down at Bane, his wand pressed against his forehead. Margaret said without hesitation, "Scamander, spare Bane's life. I'll allow you to take Nymeria." Ralph smiled, took a step forward, landed again, and lifted his foot once more. The sword sprang up, grazing Bane's face before embedding itself deeply in the rock. A thin gash ran down Bane's cheek, and stray gray hairs fell to the ground. His legs gave way, and he collapsed to the ground. Moments later, Ralph, carrying Sherry and the unconscious Nymeria, flew down the mountain on his flying broomstick. The centaurs parted to make way, but none dared to stop them. Chapter 682 Nymeria on the verge of death. After Ralph and Sherry left with Nymeria, the centaurs, under Margaret's orders, returned to their tribe along the mountain path. Only Bane remained. He walked stiffly to the rock face, trying to pull out the sword, but it was embedded too deeply in the mountainside and couldn't be moved an inch. Bane was incredibly frustrated. The sound of his tribesmen's horses' hooves as they left, even the howling mountain winds around him, sounded like mockery to him. He pounded on the rock face until his arm ached before finally stopping. Margaret walked slowly to Bane's side, patted him on the shoulder, and said, "All right, stop punishing yourself. Let's go back to the tribe." Bane growled, "I'm really not reconciled, Margaret." "What's there to be reconciled about?" Margaret comforted him. "The arrow you shot was coated with the venom of the chameleon snail. After so much time, the venom has already seeped into her bones. Even if Scamander could really help her detoxify, the wound has already pierced her intestines, and with so much blood loss, Nymeria is doomed." This was also why Margaret didn't confront Scamander and force Nymeria to stay. He only took away Nymeria, who was about to become a corpse. Scamander seemed to have one face, but the real benefit still lay with the centaurs. But Bane didn't think that way. He wanted both the benefits and the face. So, he gritted his teeth and said, "I'm going to kill Scamander. I must kill him." "Bane, you're no match for Scamander." "What makes you think you can kill him?" Margaret said seriously. "He's let you go 3 times already. I'm pretty sure that if you provoke him again, he'll kill you without hesitation, even if I plead for you. So, since Nymeria is dead, let's leave it at that." Mentioning this only reopened old wounds, making Bane's face contort in a grimace. Bane utterly despised and loathed wizards, yet he had been defeated 3 times by a wizard. And that wizard had mercifully spared him 3 times. This extreme humiliation was worse than death. "I'm going to use that coffin," Bane roared. "You're insane," Margaret snapped. "You used that coffin to kill Nymeria this time, shortening your lifespan by decades. If you use it again, how long do you think you'll live?" Bane didn't speak. He touched his gray hair, a glint of madness in his eyes. Ralph and Sherry didn't leave Brown Hollow. They rode their flying broomsticks around to the other side of the mountain, found a secluded cave, and immediately crawled into the chest. Nymeria's injuries were severe and required immediate treatment. They couldn't afford to return to Hogwarts. They were now standing in a room filled with a pungent smell of medical alcohol. Sherry wanted to place Nymeria on the operating table, but since she was a centaur, she couldn't lie down. The girl had to wave her wand, making her lie supine in midair. Ralph picked up a radio-like magical artifact from the shelf and tapped a button with his wand. Wisps of eerie green threads emerged, connecting with Nymeria's wrist. The threads trembled, and a thump-thump-thump sound came from the radio. This was a magical heart monitor, similar to a Muggle electrocardiograph, capable of detecting the heartbeat to assess the patient's condition. Ralph floated to Nemiria's side. A deep arrow was embedded in her lower chest, black blood seeping out, clearly poisoned. Nemiria was also wearing a mesh garment woven from vines, which would interfere with the surgery. So, there was no time to worry about that now. Ralph had Sherry untie it. As the girl with the ponytail cut the vines and ripped off the garment, she and Ralph instantly understood why other centaurs didn't wear clothes, but only Nemiria was an exception. It was simply too big. This was definitely the tallest mountain Rove had ever seen. Even Helena and Margaret, who were of similar size, combined couldn't compare to Nemiria. What was even more terrifying was that she was still lying supine in midair. Experienced people know that when lying supine, one naturally flattens out to the sides. Yet, Nemiria still appeared as a towering peak from every angle. It was unimaginable what she would look like standing up, truly magnificent. For a moment, not only Rove, but even Sherry, a girl, was slightly stunned. At this moment, the unconscious Nemiria suddenly coughed violently. Rove quickly reached out and pressed down on the swing, trembling, strange scenery to stop it from shaking. It wouldn't be good if it bumped into an arrow and caused further damage to the wound. Sherry came to her senses and immediately took over Rove's task, gently lifting the twin towers upwards so he could focus on treating the wound. Rove composed himself and used an alcohol-moistened gauze with a smell of crushed herbs to wipe away the dust around the wound. After cleaning, he raised his arm again, and the scalpel trembled twice on the shelf before flying out in a perfect parabola, landing precisely in his hand. Ralph, scalpel in hand, made a finger-length incision in Nemiria's wound, then repeated the incision, reaching the bone. With his left hand, he pried open the wound, and with his right, he reached into forceps, forcefully pulling out a half-arrowhead embedded in the bone, tossing it into a cup. A foul stench emanated from the wound, which gaped open horribly, blood slowly flowing out. Ralph frowned, staring at the wound. The arrowhead had pierced the intestines, a more serious injury than he had imagined. He silently took out a gourd-shaped blue and white porcelain bottle, poured out some powdered medicine, then poured out more black liquid from a white porcelain bottle, and finally took some hemostatic potion from a small, cracked bottle. He mixed the 3 potions with half a bowl of warm water, repeatedly rinsing the wound, the black blood and water filling a basin. After cleaning away the venom, Ralph began repairing Nemiria's internal organs, which had been wounded by the arrowhead. This process, however, was far more difficult. While Ralph treated Nemiria, Sherry did all the work, fetching potions and alcohol, collecting the blood in a basin, and wiping the boy's sweat. She was extremely busy and exhausted. By the time they finished, it was late at night, and they were both utterly worn out, sitting down to rest by the door. Sherry looked at the unconscious Nemiria and asked, "Ralph, how is she? Although the poison has been cleared from Nemiria, her injuries are too severe, and she has lost too much blood." "I did my best," Ralph sighed. "If she doesn't wake up within 3 days, she probably won't." "Is there any other way?" Ralph nodded. "There is another way to save her." "What way?" the girl with the ponytail asked. Ralph was silent for a moment, then said, "Unicorn blood." Chapter 683 Postpartum Depression, the Sphinx with a human head and a scorpion tail. The blood of magical creatures often possesses wondrous effects. For example, Dumbledore developed 12 uses for dragon blood, practically endlessly exploring its applications. Unicorn blood is equally miraculous. Consuming it can prolong life, allowing even those on the verge of death to linger. 4 years ago, Voldemort had Quirrell hunt unicorns to extend his life and restore his power. Even the Dark Lord resorted to consuming unicorn blood to survive, demonstrating its effectiveness. Of course, while unicorn blood is powerful, its side effects are also extremely pronounced. Consuming it incurs a curse, rendering one a half-dead being, forever tormented by pain. Therefore, Ralph would only give Nemiria unicorn blood as a last resort, but if she truly couldn't wake up, then it would be a given. After all, a miserable life is worse than a good death. After finishing their surgery on Nemiria, Ron and Sherry were up late at night. Instead of returning to school, they had a late-night snack, enjoyed the night view of the Forbidden Forest, and then went back to their trunks to sleep. It was Saturday, no classes, so they slept until almost noon before leisurely getting up and heading to the octopus spider's lair. After taking the magical materials they had searched for, Ron and Sherry returned to Hogwarts. Standing at the door of the cabin, Harry and Ron pounded on it. "Hagrid," Harry shouted, "we know you're in there. Open the door," but the door didn't open. They knocked heavily for over 10 minutes, then knocked on the window, but still no response. "How about we use magic to force the door open?" Ron suggested. Harry hesitated for a moment, then raised his wand, aimed at the lock, and whispered, "Alohomora." The lock clicked, and the door suddenly opened. They rushed in, only to find the room truly empty. Not even Tooth was there. So all that barking at the door for over 10 minutes, their voices hoarse, was for nothing. Just as the two were about to leave, a roar suddenly came from the doorway. Where did this thief come from? Then, a deep bark rang out, and Toothpick burst into the room, lunging at Ron and knocking him to the ground. "It's me, Toothpick, don't bite me," Ron cried. Seeing it was someone he knew, Toothpick stopped biting and then stuck out its tongue, affectionately licking Ron's cheek. Ron felt Toothpick's warm breath on his face, and at the same time, an indescribable stench assaulted his nostrils. Hagrid rushed into the room and, seeing Harry and Ron, paused. "What are you two doing here?" "We came to see you, Hagrid," Harry said. "Why have you been avoiding us lately?" Hagrid's eyes darted around. "I haven't been avoiding you, I'm just not feeling well. I've been staying in the Forbidden Forest lately." "Are you feeling unwell, or have you been affected by Skeeter's report?" Harry stared at Hagrid, pressing. "You don't think we mind that you're a half-giant, do you?" "Who cares, Harry? Not everyone is as kind-hearted as you," Hagrid said hoarsely. "The Malfoys, they care. They've said so many nasty things about you in the newspapers." "Oh, don't worry about what they think. They're the nasty Slytherins," Harry reassured him. "Whether you're a half-giant or not, they won't like you, you know." "That's right. You should hurry back to class." Ron stood up, wiped the drool from his face, and asked, "Hagrid, why does Toothpick smell so bad? Did it eat something unclean?" "Oh, Toothpick ate Wrist's feces for breakfast," Hagrid praised. "She's a beautiful manticore, the mother of those blast-tailed snails." "Manticore feces?" Ron's face turned ashen, and he immediately pushed away the tooth that was still licking his hand. "Don't worry, Ron," Hagrid comforted him. "Wrist has been having diarrhea lately. It's mostly watery, not that disgusting." Ron felt even more nauseous and quickly bent over to dry heave. Hagrid patted Ron's shoulder with his heavy hand, causing him to fall to the ground with a thud. Hagrid apologetically helped Ron up and asked, "Did you see Ron and Sherry when you came from the castle?" "No." Harry shook his head and frowned. "Is there something you need them for?" "I'm worried about their safety," Hagrid sighed. "When I got to Brownhole last night, the centaurs said they took Nymeria with them. I searched for most of the night but couldn't find them in the Forbidden Forest. I came to Hogwarts today to see if they were there. If I still couldn't find them, I'd have to go to you, Dumbledore." "Ron and Sherry went to the Forbidden Forest last night," Harry exclaimed in surprise. "Yes, they came to the Forbidden Forest on business and stopped by to see me." Hagrid quickly recounted the events of the previous night. Harry and Ron exchanged a glance, both seeing shock in each other's eyes. They thought the twins' nighttime stroll was already quite something, but they hadn't expected Ralph and Sherry to have an even more exciting adventure. It was truly enviable. Just then, a deafening roar came from afar. Hagrid's expression changed, and he quickly ran out. Harry and Ron followed closely behind, hurrying towards the Forbidden Forest with Hagrid. But before they went too far, they saw a huge magical creature tethered to a large tree. It had a hideous human face, a huge body like a lion, bright red fur on its neck, strong and powerful limbs and claws, and a scorpion tail with a deadly stinger at the end. The magical creature let out a deafening roar, and its target was Ralph and Sherry. They were riding flying broomsticks, floating in midair, confronting it. Ralph was on his way back to school when he suddenly heard a roar and went to investigate, only to encounter a sphinx. As he stared at the magical creature, a notification popped up in his mind: "One domesticated sphinx detected." Side quest 1 triggered: cure the sphinx's postpartum depression. Reward: spell reflection. Your skin, like the sphinx's, can repel most spells and reflect them back to enemies. Side quest 2: achieve 100% taming of the sphinx. Reward: scorpion tail. Grow a scorpion tail. Upon stinging an enemy, inject scorpion venom, instantly killing them. Quest incomplete. Chapter 684 Barty Crouch's Prison Break. Ralph was overjoyed to see the spell called Spell Reflection, but his expression darkened when he saw the name for healing injuries. Postpartum depression? What the hell? Even a sphinx could get that? But then Ralph thought, this young girl was stranded in the Forbidden Forest, imprisoned by Hagrid, and forced to mate with 60 giants. Fire crabs, giving birth to a bunch of deformed monsters, exploding tailed snails. A little postpartum depression, isn't that normal? Hagrid saw the Sphinx raise its tail, about to attack Ralph and Sherry, and shouted, "Risha, stop!" The Sphinx was obedient enough to retract its tail, but it still glared fiercely at Ralph and Sherry. "Are you two alright?" Hagrid asked with concern. "I've been looking for you for ages. Last night, it's alright, we were treating Nemiria's injuries yesterday." Ralph swept his broom back to the ground and said, "Hagrid, your manticore looks a bit off. It's definitely not right," Hagrid said with a worried expression. "Rispa has been irritable ever since she gave birth to the Blastale. I wonder if it's because of the cold weather." "She has postpartum depression," Ralph said. "She needs treatment," Hagrid asked in surprise. "What kind of illness is that?" "A mental illness," Ralph said. "Depression caused by physiological, psychological, and environmental changes." "Is it serious?" "Very serious," Ralph nodded and said seriously. "The patient can't control their emotions and will suddenly experience low mood, lack of pleasure, anger, etc. If left untreated, it can even lead to suicidal behavior." After hearing Ralph's words, not only Hagrid, but even Harry and Ron were frightened. Harry, in particular, touched his scar. He often felt inexplicably depressed and irritable, the kind he couldn't control. "Wait, this is postpartum depression? Then it's alright." Hagrid, taken aback, asked, "Can it be cured?" "It can be cured, but it's quite tricky," Ralph said in a somber tone. "How about this, Hagrid, you leave this man-hooded Sphinx with me, and I'll treat it for you, but it might take some time." "Okay," Hagrid readily agreed. "As long as it can be cured, that's all that matters. My poor Blastales are only 6 months old, they can't lose their mother like this." Sherry glanced at Ralph with a smile in her eyes. Who knows how many years his treatment would take? Although Hagrid agreed, he wanted to spend some more time with the man-hooded Sphinx, so Ralph didn't take it away immediately. They chatted for a while longer, then Ralph said goodbye to Hagrid and returned to Hogwarts with Sherry. Hagrid unchained the Sphinx and said, "I should go back to the Forbidden Forest." "Hagrid, come back to teach." "Hagrid," Harry pleaded softly. "Please come back, we all really miss you." This was, of course, a lie, but it touched Hagrid. He fought back a sob, and tears streamed down his face, seeping into his unkempt beard. "Wilmina would be a good teacher, let her teach you for now. And one more thing, have you cracked a golden egg?" At the mention of the golden egg, Harry and Ron's eyes widened in horror. They hadn't touched it since the celebration of the first project. If Hagrid hadn't mentioned it, they would have completely forgotten about it. And now, there was less than a month left until the second project of the Triwizard Tournament. Just by looking at their faces, Hagrid knew they hadn't figured it out at all. "Listen, Harry," Hagrid said in a low voice. "I don't know how to solve the mystery of the golden egg either. However, I overheard Sprout and Professor McGonagall talking during the holidays, and the golden egg involves the mermaids of the Black Lake. You need to go to the bottom of the Black Lake to find the mermaids." Hagrid quickly left with the Sphinx, leaving Harry and Ron standing there looking at each other. "No wonder Professor Grapple taught us how to deal with mermaids," Ron belatedly realized, and Professor Flitwick. Ron suddenly became excited. With so many teachers helping him, he was sure he would perform better than the champions from the other schools this time. He was finally no longer at the bottom. But Harry quickly poured cold water on his enthusiasm. "Ron, we need to solve the problem of going deep into the lake and being able to breathe for a long time." Ron fell silent. This was indeed the most difficult problem. "We might be able to use the summoning charm to summon a scuba tank from a nearby Muggle town," Harry thought, trying to replicate the operation of summoning the firebolt in the first round. Ron thought for a moment and then said, "No way. If a Muggle sees me flying in a scuba tank, it's no joke." Do you remember the flying car from second year? Of course, there was an even more important reason that Ron didn't mention. Although he had learned the summoning charm from Lupin during the first project, he hadn't mastered it. "What do we do then?" Harry frowned. "Use transfiguration to turn ourselves into fish? But we don't know any of the transfiguration Professor McGonagall taught us." Ron suddenly remembered something and exclaimed excitedly, "Harry, maybe we can use the water-breaking potion that Snape taught us. Didn't Snape say in class that this potion allows the user to stay underwater for a long time?" "That's a good idea." Harry hesitated, "but we don't have any of the ingredients to brew the water-breaking potion." "Then let's steal it," Ron said boldly. "The water-breaking potion we've brewed is all in Snape's stash. We just need to steal 2 bottles in class, And that'll solve the problem, Harry forced a smile. Stealing potions in Snape's potions class sounded like poking the eyes of a sleeping dragon. Ron, are you really not afraid of death? Stepping through the thick snow, Ron and Sherry returned to the school. When they reached the castle gate, they suddenly found a number of Aurors standing there. Fudge stood in the foyer, wearing a long black cloak and purple-pointed boots, a dark green top hat tucked under his arm, pacing back and forth. His disheveled gray hair and anxious expression were striking. Fudge saw Rove, waved hurriedly, and then ran towards him. Rove, I finally found you. Where have you been? I had some things to attend to. Rove, seeing the anxious Fudge, asked, Minister, what's wrong? Something terrible. Fudge glanced around and lowered his voice. Barty Crouch, he's escaped. Chapter 685 Snape's Triumph. For a moment, Rove thought he'd misheard. He paused, then asked, Who escaped? Barty Crouch, Fudge said. Rove asked again, uncertainly, You mean, Barty Crouch Jr.? No, it's Barty Crouch Sr., Fudge confirmed. He escaped from Azkaban. Rove's expression immediately became strange. He looked at Fudge with an expression that wasn't funny at all. Fudge sighed. He understood Rove's feelings. He had the same reaction when he first heard the news. Rove, it really is Barty Crouch who escaped. I just got the news this morning and went to Azkaban myself to confirm. Rove fell silent. If it were Barty Jr. who escaped, he wouldn't have much of an emotional reaction, but his father escaping sounded completely unbelievable. It wasn't that Rove doubted Barty Crouch's ability to escape, but rather that he had no reason to. Barty Crouch wasn't a good man, but he was definitely not a bad one either. If one had to describe him, he was a strict law-abiding citizen. He was even law-abiding to the point of being inhuman. Otherwise, he wouldn't have imprisoned his son in Azkaban without hesitation after discovering he was a Death Eater. Of course, Crouch did break the law later and secretly switched to his son's release, but that was only because of his beloved wife's dying plea, which forced him to make that change. Now, with Crouch imprisoned in Azkaban, Ralph still didn't believe he would break the law and escape. Unless, he had a compelling reason to escape. Of course, there was another possibility, that the whole thing was orchestrated by Fudge, who killed his political rival Crouch and then framed him for escaping. But Ralph quickly dismissed this idea. Since Azkaban became a prison, no criminal had ever escaped from there. If the first wizard appeared, it would be a huge scandal for Fudge. If the public found out, it would inevitably shake his authority. If he really wanted to kill Crouch, he could have just had the Dementors do it, no one would know, and nobody would care. So, Crouch probably really did escape. But how did he do it? Hearing Ralph's question, Fudge sighed. According to the Dementors, they were certain Barty was dead, so they threw him into the tomb in Azkaban. After the Auror office learned of this, they went to Azkaban to examine the body, only to find it was gone. That doesn't necessarily mean Barty Crouch is still alive, does it? Ralph asked. When the Aurors were searching in the North Sea, they found a Muggle fishing boat. The boat's owner rescued Barty and even brought him ashore, Fudge explained. Barty didn't have a wand, so he couldn't erase the boat owner's memory. Ralph narrowed his eyes. If that's the case, Barty Crouch used some kind of fake death magic to fool the Dementors. After a long silence, he asked again, before his escape, did Crouch act strangely? Like, did he come into contact with anything? In the original timeline, Sirius Black suddenly escaped because he saw Peter Pettigrew's picture in the Daily Prophet, otherwise, he wouldn't have escaped at all. Crouch might have also been provoked in some way. Fudge said in a deep voice, he spoke to the Aurors, saying he wanted to see you or Dumbledore. See me? Ralph raised an eyebrow. Yes, Fudge said seriously. Ralph, you exposed Barty's crimes and personally sent him to Azkaban. He might come to Hogwarts to seek revenge on you. You must be very careful. Crouch's escape didn't cause a public outcry. Not because the public didn't want to criticize Fudge, but because he directly blocked the news. 2 years ago, Peter Pettigrew's escape left Fudge sweating bullets. Last year's Quidditch World Cup disaster nearly cost him his job. With another prison break this year, how long could he remain minister? Therefore, Fudge strictly controlled the news, only allowing the Aurors to secretly hunt down Crouch. Security at Hogwarts was also significantly increased, as Fudge insisted that Crouch's escape was definitely to seek revenge on Ron. The official reason given was that the second event of the Triwizard Tournament was about to begin, and this was for the safety of the students. Speaking of safety, Harry and Ron felt their lives were constantly threatened. Of course, not by the second event, but by Snape. They were planning to steal potions right under Snape's nose, clearly a suicidal act. But they had no choice. To participate in the tournament, they had to take the risk. On Monday in potions class, Harry and Ron decided to act. Meanwhile, in the underground classroom, dozens of cauldrons stood side by side, the students intently brewing potions of endurance. Snape patrolled through the swirling smoke, quickly approaching Harry and asking, "Potter, what are you brewing?" "Endurance potion, Professor," Harry replied. "Then why is it so thick?" "I thought you were making yourself porridge," Snape said. The Slytherin students laughed, especially Malfoy, who laughed smugly. "Zero, Potter," Snape said harshly, wielding his wand and emptying Harry's cauldron. "You write me an essay on the correct preparation of this potion, explaining where you went wrong and why. Hand it in next class, understand?" "Understood," Harry said angrily. As Snape turned to look at Ron's cauldron, Harry suddenly pulled a string of tinder from his pocket and quickly tapped it with his wand. The fireworks began to hiss and spark. Harry aimed and threw the firework, which landed precisely in Malfoy's cauldron. Malfoy's potion exploded, spraying the entire class with its spray. Everyone screamed in terror as the potion splattered everywhere. Malfoy, his face splattered and nose swollen like a watermelon, stumbled and ran around, clutching his cheek. Amid the chaos, Ron pulled the invisibility cloak from his backpack, quickly donned it, and ran towards the storage cabinet. "Quiet! Quiet!" Snape roared. "Those splashed by the potion, come to me for burn ointment." Half the class swarmed toward Snape's desk. After everyone had drunk the antidote and their various burns subsided, Ron also managed to get his potion. Snape strode to Malfoy's cauldron, scooped out the twisted, black ashes of the firework, and the classroom fell silent. "Once I find out who threw it," Snape said in a low voice, "I'm going to expel that person." Snape stared intently at Harry, who desperately tried to look confused. Soon the bell rang, and Harry and Ron quickly packed their books and rushed out of the classroom. "Snape knows it was me," Harry whispered. "I can tell, it's okay, he has no proof it was you," Ron reassured Harry. "What can he do? Snape won't let this go, he'll definitely find other ways to torture me," Harry sighed. "Did you steal the water-breathing potion?" "Yes," Ron said excitedly, opening his bag and taking out 2 vials of potions, each with a small label bearing Ron and Hermione's names. "I didn't dare take anyone else's potions. Afraid their brewed potions wouldn't be effective, so I took Ron and Hermione's." "Great," Harry exclaimed excitedly, "now we can easily get through the second project." "I think so too," Ron said smugly. "If we get lucky, we might even take first and second place." Meanwhile, in the potions classroom, Snape opened the medicine cabinet and, after checking the medicines, discovered that 2 bottles of water-blinking potions were missing. He immediately smiled. Chapter 686: The Forbidden Power of the Centaurs. Inside the cabin, a centaur lay on her side on a hospital bed, a magical instrument measuring her heartbeat connected to her wrist, beeping incessantly. Rolf sat beside her, unwrapping the white gauze from below Nemiria's chest. He discovered the wound showed no signs of healing, instead, it had begun to fester. This was not a good sign. Rolf sighed softly, changed Nemiria's dressing again, and covered her body with a soft blanket. Sherry stood in a corner of the room, a bamboo basket slung over her arm, filled with freshly brewed potions. Before her was a huge wooden shelf, overflowing with potions, dozens of wax-sealed jars, over 100 corked vials, the same number of white glass bottles, and countless jars of dried herbs. Each container bore a precise label written in the girl's neat handwriting. Sherry carefully placed the potions from the basket onto the shelf, sorting them by type. Only on the top shelf did she need to stand on tiptoe to reach the potions. Rolf walked over and wrapped his arms around the ponytail girl's soft waist from behind, gently lifting her up so she could easily touch the top of her head. After placing the potion, Rolf put Sherry back on the ground. She turned around, glanced at Nemiria on the sickbed, and asked, "How is she?" "Her condition is not good," Rolf shook his head. "Nemiria's wound has become infected, and soon the flesh will decay and become a rotten sore. Then we can only give her unicorn blood," Sherry said. "That's right." A faint sorrow appeared on Rolf's handsome face as he smiled bitterly. "But I don't know if I'm saving Nemiria or harming her." Sherry looked at the boy in confusion, and he explained, "Unicorn blood can prolong life, but it's addictive. At first, 1 cup of blood can last for several days, but later you have to keep increasing the amount, and eventually, the blood of 1 unicorn might only last for 1 day, What if she doesn't drink it? Sherry asked. If I don't drink it, I'll feel cold all over, shiver, and won't even have the strength to walk, Ralph described. My whole body will feel like ants are gnawing at my bones. It's like being in hell. This is what wizards often call the unicorn's curse. Ralph looked at Nymeria on the sickbed, his voice low and somber. So, I always feel like I might not be saving her, but rather harming her, making Nymeria neither human nor ghost. Ralph, of course you're saving her. Sherry looked into the boy's eyes and said softly, Nymeria was dying, and you risked your life to save her from the centaurs. That's an extremely noble act. Nymeria still wants revenge, and if she dies like this, she won't be at peace. She won't blame you for giving her unicorn blood, she'll only be grateful that you saved her. The girl with the ponytail reached out and gently stroked Ralph's cheek, comforting him. As for the addiction, that's not your fault, and it's not without a way to cure it. Didn't Marcella say that the spring water on Avalon Island can lift the curse? As long as you're alive, there's hope. What you did was give Nymeria hope. Ralph's expression softened, his eyes no longer filled with sorrow. He gazed into Sherry's clear eyes, took her slightly cold, delicate hand in his, and gently warmed it by rubbing it. He murmured, Thank you, Sherry. The girl with the ponytail smiled sweetly. Just then, the steady beeping suddenly slowed, and the magical device measuring her heartbeat sounded an alarm. Ralph and Sherry quickly went to the bedside and saw Nymeria's chest heaving violently with her rapid breathing. She looked like a frail, solitary leaf, easily blown away by a gust of wind. Ralph looked at Sherry, who nodded, put 2 fingers to her lips, and whistled a clear, crisp note. A moment later, a white magical creature came galloping from afar, leaping joyfully to Sherry's side. The creature had silvery white fur, dazzlingly white, seemingly radiating a holy light that dispelled the smell of alcohol in the air. Sherry gently stroked the unicorn's head and softly asked, Ariete, I need a little of your blood to save the centaur, is that alright? The unicorn looked at Nymeria with eyes like molten gold. It slowly stepped forward, walked to the centaur's side, and sniffed. It smelled death. The unicorn returned to Sherry's side, letting out a loud neigh, then knelt down. Thank you, Ariete. A short knife appeared in Sherry's hand, forged from obsidian, its blade engraved with ancient runes. She raised the knife and sliced across the unicorn's back. Silvery white blood flowed from the wound like a spring. Ralph caught the blood in a cup and poured it into Nymeria's mouth. The silvery liquid trickled from the corner of her lips. After an unknown amount of time, Nymeria finally slowly opened her eyes. When she sat up, she found herself lying naked on her side on a bed. Nymeria felt waves of excruciating pain in her abdomen. She cautiously lowered her head and saw a wound on her abdomen, still continuously oozing pus and blood. You're finally awake, Nymeria, a familiar voice said. Nymeria looked up in horror and saw Ralph and Sherry standing not far away, watching her, and a unicorn lying on the ground, licking her back. Remembering she was still naked, Nymeria instantly grabbed a blanket, covering her upper body and concealing her exposed skin. After calming herself down, she widened her misty eyes and asked, What are you doing here? Ralph didn't answer, but instead asked, Nymeria, do you remember what happened before? Nymeria closed her eyes, racking her brains to recall what had happened. After a moment, she suddenly opened her eyes and said, I was ambushed, shot by Bane's arrow, and then ran towards the mountaintop, where I collapsed. I don't know anything after that. You saved me. Yes, Sherry nodded. Ralph and I arrived at the mountaintop in time and rescued you from that group of centaurs. You were unconscious for 3 days. Nymeria could imagine how dangerous it was to be rescued from a group of centaurs. She said gratefully, Thank you for saving me. You're welcome, Ralph said. By the way, Nymeria, I have a question for you. What question? Ronan said. Bane ambushed you using forbidden power from the tribe. Do you know what it is? Ralph asked curiously. Forbidden power. Upon hearing this, Nymeria remained silent for a long time, then said coldly, It must be the wooden coffin containing the remains of the ancient wizard hidden in the sacrificial hall. Chapter 687 The Real Grandparent-Grandchild Loan. After hearing Nymeria's words, Ralph was somewhat shocked. He hadn't expected that centaurs could use the power of the ancient wizard's remains inside the wooden coffin. The boy suddenly remembered Dumbledore telling him, it was a story passed down through generations of headmasters that somewhere deep within Hogwarts Castle, there was a wooden coffin that provided magic to Hogwarts, allowing the castle to function for 1,000 years. It seemed that not only centaurs, but even the 4 chief wizards could draw upon that power. Ralph decided to return and quickly read through the books in Ravenclaw's Chamber of Secrets to see if she had left any magic for using the remains. Last Christmas holiday, Ralph went to Nico's Manor and used the magic stored there to fight Voldemort. The powerful feeling of that endless surge of power was still unforgettable for Ralph. And the remains in the wooden coffin could easily power Hogwarts for 1,000 years, far surpassing the magic stored in Nico's Manor. With such a powerful force, if used properly, Ralph didn't know who could be his opponent. Voldemort? I'll take on 10 of them. Just as Rove was lost in his fantasies of kicking Voldemort and punching Slytherins, Nemiria's next words were like a bucket of cold water poured over his head, instantly pulling him back to reality. The power of that wooden coffin is immense, but using it comes at a great cost. What cost? Rove asked. Lifespan, Nemiria said softly. Bane's hair turned gray because he used the wooden coffin. He lost at least 20 years of his lifespan to kill me. If you divine the more distant future, the lifespan will be reduced even more. In short, the stronger the power used, the more lifespan you need to sacrifice. What if you don't have enough lifespan? Sherry asked curiously. If the lifespan is insufficient, it will continue to be taken from the user's descendants, Nemiria said slowly. Our tribe once had a centaur prophet who wanted to use that wooden coffin to glimpse events 1,000 years into the future. After he finished his divination, he died suddenly. His 13 generations of direct descendants all died young. Not a single centaur lived past 30. Ralph's scalp tingled. This was true patriarchal ending. The loan was passed down from one person to the next, generation after generation, endlessly. Therefore, the power of the ancient wizards remains in the wooden coffin is called forbidden power by us centaurs. Nemiria couldn't help but sigh and said softly, using forbidden power is also called making a deal with death. The description of making a deal with death was quite apt. The whole process was like trading one's life for power. Wasn't that making a deal with death? Nemiria wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, paused, and continued, because it consumes lifespan. Centaurs rarely use wooden coffins for divination. They mostly use them to enter the enchanted realm. You know what the enchanted realm is, right? Ralph and Sherry both nodded. They were familiar with it, and had even entered it themselves. However, their composure made Nemiria somewhat uneasy. She wasn't the type of centaur who liked to show off her knowledge, but Ralph and Sherry were still just ponies. How did they know all these secrets? Frustrated, Nemiria continued, whenever a centaur dies, their relatives go to the enchanted realm to say goodbye to the spirits. Sherry sighed. That's a good use. So many people couldn't say goodbye to their loved ones before they died, but entering the enchanted realm could lessen that regret. Ralph was silent for a moment, then suddenly asked, Nemiria, have you seen death in the enchanted realm? The story of the 3 brothers and death is too far removed from the present and has long been distorted, but Grigorovich did see death in a dream world with his own eyes. That death even guided him to find the Elder Wand. Of course, Dumbledore had guessed that it wasn't the so-called death, but just a wizard who could travel through other people's dream worlds. Death? Nemiria shook her head in confusion. We've never seen any death. Ralph frowned. Did this Grim Reaper specifically target wizards, ignoring other species like centaurs and goblins? Mentioning Gregoric reminded Ralph of something else. Gregoric had said that the saints possessed an immortal corpse, supposedly the relic of death. The saints prayed to that relic, thus entering a dreamlike state. This sounded very similar to what centaurs did to the remains in the wooden coffin. Could the relic of death in the saint's possession be the remains of an ancient wizard? And the remains inside Slytherin's coffin, after being broken open, disappeared. Could they have fallen into the hands of the saints? Ralph's brow furrowed, increasingly feeling the need to investigate this mysterious organization more thoroughly, especially its leader. Who exactly was he? Suddenly, Nemiria coughed violently, and Sherry quickly brought her a cup. Nemiria looked at the silvery white liquid in the glass, sniffed it, and frowned. Is this unicorn blood? Yes, Ralph nodded. Nemiria, I must tell you, although we saved you, your injuries were too severe, and we ultimately couldn't save you. I can only give you unicorn blood to prolong your life. Nemiria stared at him in astonishment, hardly believing her ears. Of course, she knew what taking unicorn blood meant. Nemiria was silent for a long time before saying in a hollow voice, I understand, thank you for saving me anyway. Ralph placed a bottle of potion on the bedside table. This is a sleeping potion. After taking it, you will have a very pleasant dream. I've already slept too much. Nemiria shook her head. Sleep is the best medicine. Rolf said. After Rolf and Sherry left, Amelia suddenly felt her strength seeping out of her body. So, she lay back on the bed, closed her eyes, but all she could see in her mind were the pitiful images of her people who had taken unicorn blood to prolong their lives. Soon, she would be one of them. Amelia felt a cold sweat running down her back. She opened her eyes timidly, picked up the bottle of sleeping wine, and drank it all in one gulp. Amelia lay back on the bed, and drowsiness quickly overwhelmed her. She wondered if she could dream of running freely in the forest, and closed her eyes bitterly. After Rolf and Sherry left the room, they walked hand in hand down the road, neither of them speaking for a moment. "What are you thinking about, Rolf?" the girl with the ponytail suddenly asked. "I'm thinking about Misera. I wonder if she has found Avalon, found the spring that can lift the curse." Rolf was silent for a moment, then suddenly said, "Shirley, I have to admit, I used to be very reluctant to go find that island, but looking at Marcella and Nymeria, I'm starting to waver. That's why you were sorted into Hufflepuff by the Sorting Hat, instead of any other house, because you always have a kind of compassion for the weak." Shirley looked at Rolf gently. It was from him that she first felt kindness, a warmth she had never experienced before. From then on, she secretly fell in love with him. The girl with the ponytail suddenly hugged the boy tightly and said softly, "Rolf, if you ever really want to go to Avalon, I'll go with you." Rolf rested his chin on Shirley's head, smelling her unique fragrance, and smiled. "Of course. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels." Chapter 688, A Gift for the Mermaid. Nymeria is temporarily residing in Rolf's trunk, which means his harem, his magical creature arsenal is gaining another new species. This is a delightful thing. Centaurs are proud, independent creatures who resent wizards, let alone raising them. Even contact with them is extremely difficult. This is evident in Margaret and Vane, who constitute a majority of centaurs. Even someone as powerful as Newt only lived in a centaur tribe for a time, but never raised one. Rolf keeping Nymeria fills a gap in the Scamander family's expertise in centaur breeding, making an outstanding contribution to the great cause of magical creatures. If he wanted, he could immediately write several papers on centaur breeding and publish them in the top magical journal, Fantastic Beasts magazine. First author, and with a very high impact factor. However, Rolf doesn't have time for such things right now. He's busy with the Triwizard tournament. The second project is under the Black Lake, and besides the breathing problem, there's also the issue of insufficient light to solve. Rolf, with his dazzling laser eyes, wasn't a concern, but Sherry and the others didn't. Water temperature was also an issue. The competition was at the end of February, and the weather was still cold. Prolonged immersion in the lake could easily lead to hypothermia. Therefore, Rolf took Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur to practice in the deep lake within the box to ensure they could adapt to the complex underwater environment, rather than discovering problems on the day of the competition. During their water training, their robes would get wet, so Rolf even took Sherry, Hermione, and Fleur to buy swimsuits. All three girls unanimously chose the most conservative one-piece swimsuits instead of bikinis, which disappointed Rolf. As February arrived, the atmosphere at the school grew increasingly enthusiastic. 3 months of inactivity had made them eagerly anticipate the competition. The details of the second event were also circulating wildly throughout the school. "The warriors will fight 2 dragons," a Ravenclaw student declared confidently. "Whoever kills the dragons will pass the competition. It can't be that simple. I heard the warriors have to dive 10,000 meters without equipment to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean and slay a giant sea monster," a Gryffindor student retorted. No, it's a triathlon. Starting from Hogwarts, swimming across the English Channel, over the Pyrenees to Boxbuttons, then over the Alps, across the North Sea, to Durmstrang." Suddenly, countless students at Hogwarts appeared with seemingly authoritative information. One person's uncle worked at the Ministry of Magic, another's neighbor was a friend of Ludo Bagman. The stories became increasingly outrageous, even surprising Rolf, who secretly marveled at how fortunate they weren't the project designers. Otherwise, would the warriors have had any chance? Soon, February 24th arrived, the day of the competition. Rolf woke up late that morning, leisurely leaving his dormitory and heading towards the Great Hall. When he entered the hall, He found it already filled with students, all chattering excitedly about the upcoming competition. Ralph sat down at the Hufflepuff table and, noticing Neville wasn't there, asked, "Where's Neville?" "I don't know," Justin shook his head. "Professor Sprout took him away this morning, apparently. There's a problem with the greenhouse." Ralph narrowed his eyes. It seemed Neville was the one he had to rescue for the competition. Similarly, Gabrielle, who usually clung to Ralph like an octopus, wasn't in the Great Hall either. Just as Ralph was pondering this, Justin placed breakfast in front of him, saying solicitously, "Ralph, these are snacks I specially asked the house elves in the kitchen to make this morning. They're all your favorites. Eat up, replenish your energy, you have a competition soon." Susan also warmly leaned over, massaging Ralph's shoulders, while Macmillan reported on the other champion situations. Even Hannah was reading the latest Daily Prophet to Ralph, picking out the key news items to read aloud. Ralph was taken aback by this display and asked, "What are you guys doing? The big battle is imminent." "We just wanted to help you relax," Justin laughed. Hannah cautiously asked, "Ralph, are you confident of winning first place this time?" "I've staked all my allowance this semester on you." Ralph then looked at Macmillan and Susan, who both nodded, clearly having placed bets as well, hoping to make a small profit. It wasn't just Justin and his friends who wanted to make money, Ron was too. He had just learned from Ginny that the twins were secretly running the betting scheme, and his mind immediately started racing. "Harry, let's bet on ourselves to win," Ron whispered, trying to persuade him. "Our odds are both very high. If you win, it'll be a minor upset. If I win, it'll be a huge upset, and we can make a lot of money." Harry frowned. "That's true, but how can we possibly come in first place in the second event?" "Why not?" Ron said confidently. "We already have Snape's water-breathing potion, and we've learned a good amount of magic from the professors. We're fully prepared this time, so there's a high probability we'll make a splash and be in the top two." Seeing that Harry was still hesitant, Ron finally managed to borrow 5 galleons from him and placed them in front of Ginny. "Ginny, 3 galleons on Harry, 2 galleons on myself. You go find George and Fred to place your bets later," Ron said magnanimously. Ginny looked at the stack of galleons, then at Ron in surprise, asking, "Where did you get so much money?" "Never mind me," Ron instructed. "And don't mention my name, just say you placed the bet yourself." Ginny picked up a galleon, puzzled. "Didn't you say you were going to get revenge on them for what happened at the ball? Why are you giving them money now?" "Who's giving them money?" "I'm making money off them," Ron said coldly. Either he or Harry would win dozens of galleons if they came in first place, according to the odds. Ron planned to wait until he won, then run to George and Fred to brag and infuriate those two bookies. Professor McGonagall soon arrived at the Great Hall. Standing at the door, she called out loudly, "Heroes of Hogwarts, follow me." Ron stood up and walked towards Professor McGonagall, and the Hufflepuff students cheered enthusiastically. The Ravenclaw and Gryffindor students also cheered for their respective houses' heroes. The group followed Professor McGonagall out of the Great Hall and onto the castle grounds. The snow on the ground had melted, replaced by a chilly, damp atmosphere. Low-hanging gray-purple clouds pressed over the castle, and the continuous cold rain had made the lawn slippery and muddy. However, Ron, Sherry, and Hermione had already drunk potions and were warm and cozy. Harry and Ron, on the other hand, were wrapped tightly in their robes, clearly uncomfortable in the cold wind. They followed Professor McGonagall and soon arrived at the Black Lake, where they saw a tent near the shore, shrouded in the gray morning mist. "Hurry up and go in," Professor McGonagall instructed. "Ludo is already waiting inside. Remember, if you encounter danger, give up early. Don't push yourself too hard, understand?" As Professor McGonagall spoke, she gave Ron a special look. In the first challenge, he had been captured by a Thunderbird, attacked by a Basiljuice, and left stranded on a mountaintop, enduring the entire competition before finally scoring 4 points. Professor McGonagall thought Ron might as well give up as soon as he entered. After all, the difference between 0 and 4 points wasn't that big, and he could suffer less. But Ron looked confident. He wasn't the same person he used to be. Entering the tent, Ron saw that Durmstrang's students were already there. Most of them were calm and composed, clearly already aware of the competition. Krum sat by the fire, his face serious in the flames, looking under immense pressure. Krum was indeed under a lot of pressure. Despite being a Quidditch star, he hadn't scored high in the first event. He had to win the second event to close the gap with the champions ahead, Otherwise his hopes of winning the Triwizard Tournament would be slim. Ludo smiled broadly at Ron and the others, saying gently, "The Boxburton's champions haven't arrived yet. Wait a moment, relax, make yourselves at home." Ludo suddenly leaned closer, lowered his voice, and whispered, "Are you all ready? Did you bring the Merman's gift?" Ron, Sherry, and Hermione nodded. Harry and Ron looked completely bewildered, and they asked simultaneously, "What gift, Ludo?" Chapter 689 Malfoy, Scamander will leave his body intact. Seeing the bewildered looks on Harry and Ron's faces, Ludo was taken aback. "You two don't even know about the mermaid's gift? You're participating in a chicken-themed contest?" He scratched his head, confirming again, "You two haven't solved the secret of the golden egg." "No." Harry honestly shook his head. "But we know we have to dive into the Black Lake to find the mermaid," Ron quickly said. Ludo twirled a soft mustache, his broad brows furrowing thoughtfully. It seemed someone had told them about the contest. But they hadn't told them everything, omitting a crucial piece of information. Seeing Ludo's changing expression, even Harry, if you were slow-witted, realized something was wrong. He hurriedly asked, "Mr. Bagman, what's the gift for the mermaid?" "The gift is..." Just then, the tent flap was pulled open again, and Madame Maxim led the Boxburton students into the tent. Ludo immediately shut his mouth. Maxim was a formidable woman. He didn't want her to find fault with helping Hogwarts students cheat. After greeting Maxim, Ludo clapped his hands and said, "All right, everyone's here now, it's time to give you the details. The second project will take place at the Black Lake. I think you've all learned this from the Golden Egg and are prepared." The warriors nodded, including Harry and Ron, though their expressions seemed rather unnatural. "You'll be heading to the Black Lake soon. Each warrior will separate and enter from different crossings, heading individually to Mermaid Village." "Are all crossings the same distance from Mermaid Village?" a Durmstrang student asked, voicing everyone's concern. "Of course not," Ludo smiled. "The straight-line distance between the closest and furthest crossings to Mermaid Village can differ by several miles." The warriors exchanged glances. Such a large difference meant a significant advantage. "Is the crossing decided by lottery?" a Boxburton's girl inquired. "No drawing lots," Ludo shook his head. "It'll be based on the performance in the first event. Whoever scores higher will have a shorter journey." Many people looked at Rove with envy and jealousy. He was already stronger than others, and now he had the advantage in distance, making the gap even wider. But there was nothing they could do. After all, he came in first place in the first event. Ludo glanced at his watch and said, "All right, it's time. We should go." Harry and Ron wanted to secretly ask what the gifts were on the way to the Black Lake, and maybe borrow some from someone. But as soon as they stepped out of the tent, a group of staff came and led everyone to their respective fairy docks. Harry and Ron were dumbfounded. They were like students arriving at an exam hall, shocked to learn that some of the content on the test was something they hadn't reviewed at all. Now they wanted to cram at the last minute, but the proctors had already arrived. Rove followed Ludo and quickly arrived at the Black Lake. Thousands of seats were lined up on the shore, their reflections shimmering in the lake. The entire school was out, sitting in the chairs, making a noisy commotion. Rolf saw 15 enormous magical screens floating in midair, displaying advertisements. He recalled that in the original timeline, the second and third events of the Triwizard Tournament weren't broadcast live at all. Spectators endured hours in the cold wind, seeing nothing. It was pure torture, not a viewing experience. Thanks to Rolf's butterfly effect, the second event was still broadcast live, which was undoubtedly a good thing. Ludo pointed his wand to his throat and said, loud voice. His voice quickly boomed like thunder, sweeping across the dark lake and reaching the stands. "Listen up, everyone. Our warriors are already at their positions at the other crossings of the Black Lake. They will venture deep into the lake to find the mermaid village and, guided by the mermaids, reclaim what has been stolen from them. They have a full 2 hours. I'll count to 3 and begin. 1, 2, 3, a sharp whistle echoed in the cold, still air, and cheers and applause erupted from the stands. The young wizards all stared intently at Ralph, who stood on the shore, eager to see how he would enter the water. But Ralph didn't use transfiguration, nor did he take a potion, nor did he use the bubble hug charm. He simply calmly took a scale from his pocket. It was a golden scale, warm, almost alive, shimmering with a golden light, brighter than gold itself. Ludo, who had returned to the judge's stand, soon spoke with a slightly puzzled tone that echoed throughout the Black Lake. Scamander took a scale out of his pocket. What's he going to do? Sitting beside him, Octavia Akis narrowed his single eye and suddenly said, "It's a scale from a golden double-tailed mermaid." Ralph stared at the golden scale, which had been peeled from Myrcella's body. According to the girl, the scale had been soaked in bodily fluids. As long as it was held in his mouth, he could breathe underwater. Ralph put the scale in his mouth, savoring its authentic scent of seaweed, the ocean, and mermaids, then flew towards the center of the lake and plunged into the water. Meanwhile, far downstream, the other warriors also entered the water. Standing at the tent entrance, Malfoy anxiously gazed into the distance, hearing a faint whistle. The competition must have already begun, Malfoy thought gloomily. Once those students finished, it would be their turn. Suddenly, a cry rang out behind him, followed by angry shouts. "Shut up, Crabbe, stop crying, Ada, let him cry, he's scared too." Malfoy turned and comforted him. Who wouldn't be scared? They started with 9 people, and a third of them died in the first event. The mortality rate was terrifying. Who knew if they would be among the third in the second event? Not to mention the third event, it was truly designed to wipe them all out. Not to mention Crabbe, even Malfoy was terrified. His child was still young, and his wife, though no longer young, still retained her charm. What will happen to Malfoy and his widowed family if he dies? But his crying keeps me awake, Ada Avery yelled impatiently. "I want to tear him apart." Avery finished speaking, stood up, and left the tent, grumbling. Malfoy looked at Crabbe and Goyle, their faces filled with fear, and whispered, "Ignore him. We'll do the same as before, find a place to hide once we enter the Black Lake, and wait until the match is over. We definitely won't die." Crabbe and Goyle both nodded. Malfoy then looked at Electo Carrow in the corner and asked, "Where's your brother?" "Surely he's not too scared to come. Amicus is at the bottom of the Black Lake. He'll come after we deal with that problem." Electo smiled. "It won't interfere with the match. He went to ambush Scamander," Malfoy exclaimed in astonishment. "Yes. Didn't Amicus say before the first project even started that he was going to kill Scamander?" Alexius put his feet up on a chair and said lazily, "I'm already surprised that my brother waited so long to make his move." Malfoy's expression shifted, staring intently at Alexius. After a long pause, he sighed. "You'd better get ready to collect a body." "That's hard to say," Alexius said jokingly. "Amicus likes torturing corpses, he's rough around the edges, and probably won't leave Scamander with a complete body." "No, you misunderstand, Alexius. I mean you should go collect your brother's body," Malfoy said expressionlessly. "Scamander will definitely leave him a complete body." Chapter 690 Giant Squid. As Ralph dived into the water, the young wizards erupted in discussion, debating how he managed to breathe underwater. Ludo, standing on the judge's platform, after a brief silence, spoke again, his voice booming like thunder across the Black Lake. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I just consulted our judge, Mr. Akis, director of the International Department of Magical Cooperation. His explanation is that Scamander is holding a mermaid scale. It possesses special magic, and by holding it in his mouth, he can breathe underwater like a mermaid." Hearing Ludo's words, the audience burst into even more excited chatter. They hadn't expected mermaid scales to have such a magical effect. Everyone immediately thought of the mermaids in the Black Lake, wishing they could catch one and get a scale for themselves. But Ludo's next words left the students feeling utterly disappointed. Not all mermaid scales have this magical effect, only those of the golden double-tailed mermaid do. These mermaids are renowned for their beauty and are extremely rare. They have a custom of gifting scales, but they only give them to their closest confidants, so I'm very curious. Ludo clicked his tongue. Where did Scamander get the scale he has? This remark piqued the students' curiosity as well. Dumbledore, sitting in the judge's seat, naturally knew where the scale came from. After all, it was he who had sent Ralph to treat a mermaid Myrcella that year. Dumbledore's main purpose was to get Ralph close to Myrcella and find out about Gryffindor. He hadn't expected Ralph to go even further, even obtaining a scale. Dumbledore couldn't help but sigh. Newt was indeed a master of magical creatures, but in terms of taming female magical beings, he was far inferior to his grandson Ralph. The difference between the two was immense. Let's turn our attention to the other heroes. Granger from Hogwarts pulled out a handful of magical plants. Everyone recognized them as slippery magical plants that looked like grayish-green rat tails. "Oh, it's a gill sack," Ludo, with his extensive knowledge, introduced them. "It comes from the Mediterranean and was first discovered by Beaumont Marjoriebanks. She nearly suffocated after eating it, but was saved by submerging her head in the water. The students remembered, as Beaumont Marjoriebanks was a member of the Chocolate Frog Cards and a regular. After Hermione consumed the gill sack, her legs grew longer, and her toes became webbed. The girl jumped into the water with a splash. Fleur Delacour from Boxburton's used the bubble head charm, a good idea. Elisa from Durmstrang has taken out an oxygen tank. Ludo's voice suddenly rose as he watched this scene with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. Indeed, Elisa had summoned a muggle diving device, much to the students' astonishment. She calmly put it on and plunged into the lake. "Look what that is. Merlin, what is Shirley Swinton doing?" Ludo's exclamation instantly drew the attention of all the students, their eyes fixed on the magical screen, their faces filled with astonishment. Shirley leaped into the lake, swimming forward with a perfect freestyle stroke. The next second, her lower body transformed into a fishtail covered in golden scales. Shirley leaped out of the water, drawing a beautiful arc, then flipped back in, splashing a huge spray. Then, the ponytail-wearing girl gracefully swung her tail, swimming towards the bottom of the lake at an astonishing speed. For a moment, the audience in their seats were completely stunned. "That's a real mermaid." Ludo craned his neck to look at Shirley and exclaimed, "To be honest, I've never seen the legendary golden double-tailed mermaid, but she probably can't be more beautiful than Swinton." Ludo's words were unanimously agreed upon. After praising her, he added in an extremely professional tone, "Swinton must have used transfiguration to turn herself into a mermaid. That's an extremely high-level transfiguration. No matter the outcome of the competition, I will give Swinton a high score." In fact, not only Ludo, but the other professors were also extremely surprised, especially Maxim. Shirley was only a fourth-year student, but her amazing transfiguration ability was something that even many adult wizards, let alone older students, even Maxim himself, couldn't reach. Not only was she beautiful, but her magical talent was also outstanding. For a moment, Maxim felt a little jealous. At the same time, Krum presented a stark contrast. He also used transfiguration to try to turn himself into a shark, but he failed, only managing to produce half a shark's head. This made Krum look more like a genetically mutated monster after drinking nuclear wastewater. Ha ha ha, Krum is a seventh-year student. Compared to Swinton, the difference is just too great, Ludo joked. Maybe our Quidditch star hasn't been focusing all his energy on his studies. This teasing drew laughter from the Hogwarts students, making Karkaroff's face turn quite ugly. Harry stood not far away, witnessing Krum's transformation the entire time. They had the same score in the first challenge, so they entered the water close together. Looking at Krum, who was only wearing shorts and had a shark head, Harry had a bold idea for a moment. Of course, he wasn't interested in Krum himself, but in the mermaid's gift. Harry still didn't know what the gift was, but Krum definitely did. Harry muttered to himself, "Why don't I just knock Krum unconscious and steal his gift? Isn't that the classic case of the neighbor hoards food, I hoard guns?" But Harry ultimately didn't act, watching Krum dive into the water. Harry quickly drank the water-breathing potion he'd stolen from Snape. He took off his shoes and socks, rolled up his trousers, and put his feet in the water. The moment Harry touched the water, he shuddered and pulled his feet back. The water was so cold. With scales in his mouth, Ralph swam underwater. He could feel the oxygen in the lake water flowing into his mouth, making him feel as if he were on land. However, the scales only allowed him to breathe, not increase his speed. So, Ralph opened his mouth and inhaled sharply. The magic from the airbird allowed him to swallow the dissolved oxygen in the water rapidly, like a whale gulping it down. In an instant, Ralph's belly swelled up, like a frog. He suddenly opened his mouth and exhaled the oxygen upwards, whirlwind, with a loud bang. Propelled by the recoil of the oxygen, Ralph shot towards the bottom of the lake like an arrow. As they ventured deeper into the black lake, visibility dwindled, and Rove's eyes gleamed like laser beams, piercing the eerily gray water. Suddenly, his eyes widened as he spotted a gigantic squid floating directly below. Rove was charging towards the giant squid at 80 miles per second, and it slowly opened its mouth wide. Chapter 691 The Mermaid's Trial. The giant octopus had seen plenty of food delivered to its doorstep, but this was the first time it had ever seen food thrown directly into its mouth at such speed. Although it had recently eaten a grandillo and wasn't particularly hungry, it felt it would be disrespectful to refuse such an eager buffet. So, the octopus opened its mouth wide, patiently waiting for its precise feeding. Rolf, of course, didn't want to be eaten, but he was too fast. Even slowing down, he was already a lamb to the slaughter. In a split second, he exhaled a puff of gas to the right, giving his body a slight initial velocity to the left. Thus, Rolf's linear acceleration turned into parabolic motion, his body tracing a graceful arc in the lake water, just missing the octopus. Seeing its prey about to escape, the giant octopus extended a tentacle as thick as an arm, shooting towards the boy like an arrow. The tentacle spun in the water, instantly wrapping around the boy's ankle and yanking him back sharply. Rolf calmly conjured an ice blade, and with a swift stroke, severed the tentacle. The severed tentacle detached from Rolf's body, still thrashing about, while the retracted segment oozed copious amounts of blue blood, emitting a foul stench. Rolf was flung away, his body spinning several times in the water due to the immense force, and a sudden ding sounded in his mind. A wild giant octopus detected, triggering side quest 1, help the giant octopus reattach its severed tentacles. Reward, black ink spell, can use magic to create a black liquid containing a unique neurotoxin that can paralyze enemies. Side quest 2, capture a wild giant octopus. Reward, biomimicry, can change body color and shape like an octopus, mimicking various environments and most marine magical creatures. Side quest 3, 100% tame a wild giant octopus. Reward, tentacle suckers. Suckers appear on its skin, possessing extremely strong suction capabilities. Quest incomplete. After regaining his footing, Rolf glanced at the system rewards. He had originally intended to head straight for the mermaid village, but now he decisively turned around and ran directly towards the octopus. The Triwizard Tournament, nothing was more important than treating the octopus. He was a veterinarian dedicated to saving lives. From the judge's stand, Ludona's booming voice rang out again, excitedly announcing, Scamander was attacked by a giant octopus. He severed his tentacles and escaped. Was he about to leave? Oh, no. Scamander actually charged at the giant octopus. Under the watchful eyes of all the students, more tentacles shot towards Rolf, successfully encircling him. The octopus suddenly tightened its tentacles, trying to bind Rolf, but fate was against it. The boy darted and weaved in the water, dodging and severing the tentacles that brushed past him. The tentacles, like ropes, swirled in the air, unable to get even a fraction closer to the boy. With its tentacles constantly being cut off, the giant octopus let out a deafening wail. As it frantically twisted its body, it spewed out a massive cloud of ink, completely polluting the surrounding water. Rolf immediately waved his wand, casting a bubblehead charm on himself to prevent being paralyzed by the poison. When he emerged from the ink, the giant octopus was nowhere to be seen. That octopus escaped so quickly? This is neither scientific nor magical. Rolf frowned, carefully observing his surroundings. He quickly spotted a giant clam floating in the water. Strangely, blue blood flowed continuously from its body. Rolf smiled and ran straight towards the clam. The clam suddenly swelled up, transforming back into a giant octopus. It tried to repeat its trick, spewing ink again, but a water dragon slammed it into the riverbed with a thunderous roar. Aquatic plants grew wildly, completely entangled the giant octopus. Giant octopuses are masters of shape-shifting among magical creatures. They can change color and shape at will to mimic their surroundings and other creatures, Ludo shouted. But it's been exposed. Scamander has caught the octopus. Is he going to kill it? Rolf, of course, wouldn't kill the octopus. He simply grabbed it, treated its severed tentacles, and rode it towards the mermaid village. With a giant octopus as his mount, no magical creature dared to stop him now. He swam deeper and deeper, and soon he saw many rough stone dwellings all around, speckled with seaweed. More and more stone dwellings appeared, some even surrounded by gardens. Ugly-looking mermaids stood in the gardens, curiously watching the boy, whispering amongst themselves. Rolf had been to the mermaid village before, and he easily crossed the streets to the village square. In the center of the square, a large group of mermaids had gathered, some singing in unison, calling for the warriors to come. Rolf landed on his octopus and smiled at a tall mermaid, Chief Mercus. Long time no see, Rolf, it's so good to see you. The female mermaid chief swam over, warmly embracing Rolf and kissing his cheek. This scene infuriated the group of female students watching the competition. Where did this ugly monster come from, daring to take advantage of Rolf like that? Ugh, shameless. Mercus was indeed quite ugly. She had yellow eyes, a large string of seashells around her neck, and wore a seaweed-woven dress. She had a long, thin, blue tail with gleaming scales, iron-gray skin on her upper body, and long, messy, dark green hair, even messier than Hermione's. It's been 2 years since you last treated Marcella, Mercus said, scrutinizing Ralph. You don't even come to see me at the bottom of the lake. I've been busy with my studies, Ralph chuckled. Did your grandfather come to watch the game? Mercus asked, adjusting her hair. No, Ralph shook his head. He's still in America. Mercus was very disappointed. She and Newt were old friends. According to her, they were a perfect match in their youth, a handsome man and a beautiful woman. It was a pity Newt was expelled from Hogwarts, allowing Tina to steal him away. Of course, Ralph had consulted Newt about this claim, in front of Tina. Newt naturally denied it outright, practically saying he didn't know Mercus. Ralph and Mercus exchanged pleasantries for a moment, then Ralph asked, have the other warriors arrived? You're the first, Mercus said. Did you bring your gift? Yes, Ralph said, pulling a sprig of ghost grass from his pocket. The first task required collecting 3 things, a golden egg, dragon glass, and ghost grass. According to the song inside the golden egg, bring that gift now, and come before us, and we will guide you. Since dragon glass was used to hatch the golden egg, the gift could only be the 3rd item, ghost grass. This couldn't be guessed. So, where's the treasure I'm taking? Ralph asked. He had just looked around and didn't see Neville. You still have to pass the mermaid's test to find the treasure, Mercus said. What test? You'll find out once you enter that building. Mercus pointed to a dilapidated house in the distance and laughed. Once you go inside, go to the last room, and you'll find your lost treasure. Go now. Chapter 692 The Opportunity to Mine with a Mermaid. Led by a group of mermaids, Rove arrived at a dilapidated house. The house had a peculiar shape, resembling a giant seashell. Barnacles clung to the walls, shimmering like fish scales, giving the entire building an eerie feel, as if a leviathan had crawled out of the deep sea. Rove stood there for a moment, then opened the door and entered the room alone. The mermaids didn't follow him. Instead, they looked at the house with fear. Rove swam through the doorway and froze. The entire room looked like the uneven cavity of a sponge, and the walls, floors, and ceilings were covered with murals depicting various aquatic animals. A living building, was Rove's first impression. The aquatic animals in the murals were so lifelike, as if they were alive. As Rove swam forward, he passed painted crabs, clams, and starfish. Pale sharks darted through the water, while eels and octopuses slithered among the rocks. At the far end of the room was a door, adorned with a mural depicting a group of mermaids wielding large swords crafted from dragon bones. Ralph didn't rush to open the door, instead examining the dragon bone swords, finding their design truly beautiful. Just then, the mural on the far right suddenly rippled, gently undulating, and the mermaids in the painting seemed to come alive, emerging from the wall. The tall mermaid raised its dragon bone sword high, aiming directly at Ralph, who was still intently admiring the mural. Students in the audience screamed at this sight, and a young wizard shouted warning Ralph to get out of the way. Ralph, of course, didn't hear the audience's warnings. He was still focused on studying the sword. Damn it, Scamander didn't realize those murals could move. Ludo's round face twisted into a grimace, like a giant ball of cheese. As the first place winner of the project, and the first warrior to enter the mermaid village in the second project, am I destined to stop here? The mermaid gripped his greatsword, aiming for Scamander's back, but what happened next left everyone bewildered. Despite his gaze being fixed on the mural, it was as if he had eyes in the back of his head. At the critical moment, he twisted his waist, sidestepping the dragon bone greatsword. The tip of the blade struck the ground, sending up a shower of dazzling sparks. Missing his target, the mermaid swung another large wheel-like attack with one arm, slashing horizontally at the boy standing in the corner. With nowhere to retreat, Rove leaped upwards, dodging the slash, and simultaneously extended his left arm, striking the mermaid on the head. No longer able to swing his sword, the mermaid immediately picked up the loba worm from his waist and gently squeezed it at Rove. The loba worm's nozzle spewed out a large cloud of purple venom. Ralph didn't dodge at all. Instead, he took a deep breath facing the venom and laughed, turning things into stone. The mermaid lost sensation on its head, followed by numbness that crept up its cheeks, eyes, and teeth, then its neck and chest. When Ralph landed again, his feet were on the blade of the dragon bone greatsword, and the mermaid who had attacked him was now a statue. The whole process happened in the blink of an eye. The audience's gasps for Ralph hadn't even finished before the battle was over. The ambushing mermaid was instantly petrified, while Ralph, the one who was ambushed, was unharmed, a result that clearly astonished many. Some students even used binoculars to repeatedly replay the battle. The magical screen was large enough for them to see clearly, but these were professional panoramic binoculars, allowing them to replay the footage in slow motion and enjoy Ralph's performance repeatedly. Even Ludo was shocked and somewhat taken aback, unsure how to explain for a moment. He stammered for a long time before finally saying, "Oh, Scamander was too fast just now. I didn't even see how he made his move before he petrified the mermaid." However, his skill in wandless spellcasting is truly amazing. Ralph returned to the ground, intending to take the bone sword from the mermaid as a trophy, when the mermaid suddenly vanished. It transformed into a cloud of mist and returned to the mural, and the tightly locked door immediately opened. Ralph raised an eyebrow, staring at the mermaid in the mural. After a moment's thought, he walked towards the second room. This room was also filled with murals, mostly depicting a disgusting, green monster with sharp horns. They were Grindylows, a highly aggressive dark magic creature. As Ralph approached the third door, the Grindylows came back to life, crawling out from the walls. Ralph now fully understood the content of the second test. The boy watched the group of Grindylow rushing towards him, spread his hands, and said, "Ice Age." Starting with Ralph, the lake water began to freeze at a visible speed, and the chill spread towards Grindylow. In the central square of Mermaid Village, Sherry, transformed into a mermaid, became the second warrior to arrive thanks to her exceptional speed. Her arrival undoubtedly attracted the attention of countless mermaids. She was so beautiful. If it weren't for the fact that she only had one tail, everyone would definitely think she was a golden double-tailed mermaid. "I remember your name is Sherry. You were with Ralph when you came to treat Missera that year," Mercus said. "It's me, Chief Mercus." Sherry handed him the ghost grass, saying, "This is a gift from mermaids." "Okay, just go into that building," Mercus said. Seeing Sherry hesitate, Mercus knew what she wanted to ask and said softly, "Ralph went in 10 minutes ago. If you're fast enough, you can catch up with him." Sherry immediately swam towards the building. After the girl with the ponytail, Hermione and Fleur became the third and fourth warriors to arrive. Next were Krum and Harry. In the first challenge, Krum only got a golden egg and dragon glass. The ghost grass was bought by Karkaroff from the black market. After all, cheating was a traditional skill in the Triwizard Tournament. However, the merfolk didn't care where it came from. After getting the ghost grass, they let him into the building. Harry wanted to go with Krum but was stopped. "You don't have ghost grass, you can't go in." Mercus shook his head. "What if I insist on going in?" Harry said fiercely. Mercus sneered, whistled, and immediately more than a dozen merfolk surrounded Harry. The merfolk, wielding large swords and with menacing appearances, stared intently at Harry, as if they would chop him into mincemeat at any moment. "Defeat them all, and I'll let you in," Mercus chuckled in a hoarse, low voice, pointing to a group of extremely ugly merfolk further away. "Not only will you get in, but you'll also get a chance to mate with them. Merfolk all like strong warriors, you know." Chapter 693 The Swift Ralph. Although Professor Grubland had specifically taught Harry how to deal with mermaids in his magical creatures class, and Harry had learned quite a bit of magic, he had no intention of fighting them. Not only were they numerous and powerful, but even if he could defeat them and gain permission to enter the house, it came with the added consequence of mermaid mating rites, a deadly thing indeed. Harry vaguely remembered Lockhart, who on Valentine's Day night was thrown into the Black Lake by Snape and taken away by a mermaid to marry and have children. For the next few months, Lockhart stayed in the mermaid village, and even Dumbledore couldn't bring him back. Clearly, mermaid mating wasn't a joke, it was a serious matter. So, Harry simply stayed put, waiting for the other warriors to arrive so he could steal their ghost grass. Ron shared the same idea. This thought intensified when he spotted a Durmstrang warrior ahead. Polyucco glanced back and also saw Ron. He remembered this guy was a Hogwarts student, so he should know the way to the Black Lake, right? Somewhat lost, Polyucco stopped, waiting for Ron to swim closer. He asked in broken English, "Hey, I remember you're called Wekry, right? Do you know which way the mermaid village is?" Polyucco gripped his wand tightly. If the boy didn't answer, he was prepared to resort to violence. Ron hesitated for a moment, then raised his hand and said, "That way." Polyucco turned to look into the distance. Just as he was about to ask another question, the sound of chanting a spell suddenly rang out behind him. Ron raised his wand, aimed it at Polyucco's head, and shouted, "Piercing arrow!" A water arrow spiraled towards Polyucco, popping the bubble on his head. and lake water immediately poured into his nose and mouth. Polyucco quickly recast the bubble head charm on his head, but another water arrow shot out, causing the bubble to burst again. "Oh, the first skirmish has begun," Ludo shouted. "The wheel eyes of Hogwarts have attacked Polyucco of Durmstrang." Everyone turned to look, seeing Polyucco repeatedly casting the bubble head charm on himself, only to have it broken each time. Avoid using the bubble head charm underwater. This was something Professor Glapland had emphasized in class. The fact that the Durmstrang warrior didn't understand this gave many Hogwarts students a strange sense of superiority. Karkaroff stared at Polyucco speechlessly. In the first challenge, this kid tried to force that red-haired girl named Swinton to team up with him, resulting in him being severely injured by Scamander and ultimately losing 4 points. And now, in the second challenge, he hadn't learned his lesson and was provoking a Hogwarts student again. It wasn't just stupid, it was downright stupid. Polyucco was now somewhat regretful, but he regretted not subduing Weasley immediately. He was confident he could defeat his opponent. After all, Weasley had only scored 4 points in the first challenge. Polyucco, though he also scored the same, felt he was just unlucky to have run into Scamander. "Give me the gift for the mermaid," Ron shouted nervously, his arms trembling. "Give it to me, and I'll let you go." Polyucco stared intently at Ron, wanting to retaliate, but he couldn't hold back any longer. His face flushed red, and he pulled a handful of ghost grass from his pocket. Ron took the ghost grass and fled in a panic. Polyucco finally cast a bubble head charm on himself, breathing heavily. After catching his breath, he watched Weasley's retreating figure with a cold expression. "Daring to steal my things. I'll kill this guy." Floating in a huge room, Ron stared at the magical creatures emerging from the murals. He had already passed through 3 rooms, encountering a mermaid, Grindylow, and a sea monster with a horse's head and a fish's tail. Each time a magical creature was defeated, a door would open, leading to the next room. At this moment, Ralph was standing in the 4th room, facing a rune-like serpent. It wasn't large, and its body was slender, but the sinister eyes of its 3 heads were fixed on the boy, flicking its tongue repeatedly, thick saliva dripping from its wounds. The rune-like serpent arched its back and swiftly swooped down, opening its 3 gaping maws, attempting to devour Ralph. Ralph stood still, when suddenly another boy appeared to his side, using the serpent's back and heads as stepping stones and springboards, leaping forward, wielding an ice blade, striking one of the heads precisely. The rune-like serpent, its head severed, continued its forward momentum, but also veered sideways several meters, just barely missing Ralph before its entire body crashed heavily to the ground. Both Ralphs simultaneously reached the rune-like serpent, and with swift strokes, beheaded the remaining 2 heads. The figure of the Neferpitou disappeared, returning to the mural, and then another door opened. Ralph passed through the door, and this time, instead of seeing the mural, he encountered a group of mermaids. Before the mermaids stood 15 students, the treasures the warriors were tasked with rescuing in the second project. Neville was bound to a chair, with the unconscious Gabrielle beside him. Also present were Hermione and Sherry's roommate, and a group of other students. Ralph went to Neville's side, untied him, and checked Gabrielle's body. After confirming that Gabrielle was only asleep due to magic, Ralph led Neville towards the last door. The mermaids opened a door, and Ralph led Neville out of the room, appearing in the mermaid village. 27 minutes and 7 seconds, Scamander is the first warrior to find a student, Ludo announced, looking at his watch. Swinton, in second place, has only just entered the 3rd room. Hearing Ludo's words, the students cheered enthusiastically, many calling out Ralph's name. At this moment, Ralph turned around and examined the seashell-shaped building before him, marveling at it. The murals inside could materialize into magical creatures to attack, and after being killed, they would return to the murals, theoretically making them immortal. And, if the murals depicted more dangerous magical creatures like dragons instead of mermaids, could they still materialize? Ralph was very interested in the building and the magic used. However, this wasn't the time to investigate. He swam towards the plaza with Neville, preparing to say goodbye to Marcus. Harry was still waiting for the other heroes in the plaza. Seeing Ralph, he asked in surprise, "Ralph, why are you so late? Did you get lost, huh?" Ralph glanced at Harry questioningly, then pointed at Neville and said, "I've completed the second task and am now heading back to shore." Chapter 694 Carlo's Ambush. Under Harry's shocked and awe-inspiring gaze, Ralph left Mermaid Village with Neville. What shocked Harry even more was that they left riding on a giant octopus, a super cool transportation that made Harry drool with envy. But what good was just envying others? He had to take action. After waiting for ages, Harry finally saw Lucas from Durmstrang. He crouched low in a corner, decisively ambushed Lucas, knocked him unconscious, and stole his ghost grass. Karkaroff, witnessing this, nearly ground his teeth to powder. He had bought these ghost grasses from Snape for his own heroes, at a great price. But now they were being stolen one after another by Hogwarts heroes. What a bunch of useless trash. Ralph also noticed Harry and Lucas's fight, but he didn't stay to watch the chicken fight. Instead, he urged the giant octopus to hurry towards the shore. Winning the race was more important than watching the spectacle. But halfway there, the giant octopus stopped. More accurately, it was stopped. A wizard floated nearby, his face ugly, with small eyes and huge bags under his highbrow bones, slightly sunken cheeks, a large nose covered in pimples, and oily, sallow skin. Ralph squinted at the man, glancing around casually before smiling slightly. Amicus Caro, what are you doing here? Getting used to the competition venue? No, I'm here specifically to wait for you, Ralph Scamander. Amicus toyed with his wand, making a throat-slitting gesture, grinning coldly, and bluntly stated, I'm here to kill you. The students in the stands, who had been cheering, fell silent instantly upon hearing this. They stared at the magical curtain in bewilderment. Was this also part of the Triwizard Tournament exam? Mrs. Maxim, on the judges' panel, had the same question. Of course not, Dumbledore shook his head. We didn't design such a project. Looks like Hogwarts security isn't as good as they say. Karkaroff's face broke into a gloating smile. He couldn't be happier that Scamander was killed. Carlo attacked Scamander. You must have known all along, Karkaroff, a hoarse voice suddenly rang out. Karkaroff whirled around and saw Mad-Eye Moody limping towards him, his heavy body leaning against his cane, his magical eyes staring unblinkingly at him. What do you mean? What do I mean? Moody sneered. If I remember correctly, you and Amicus Caro are old friends, and you even worked together under him. Didn't Caro talk to you before attacking Scamander? Karkaroff's face turned ashen, revealing a mixture of resentment and fear. He quickly denied it. No. I don't know him at all. Was Caro also a Death Eater? Maxim frowned upon hearing this. Professor Dumbledore, you promised to ensure the students' safety. My promise still stands. Dumbledore looked at Moody and said, Alastair, please take the wizards immediately and go to the affected waters to support Rolf. Other warriors should also be protected by wizards in secret. Yes, Moody sneered at Karkaroff and turned to leave. At this moment, Carlo floated in the water, staring at Ralph, and laughed smugly. Don't expect anyone to come to your aid immediately. I set up an anti-apparition charm in this area a long time ago. By the time they arrive, it will be too late. They'll only be able to collect your corpse. Oh, Ralph's expression remained unchanged as he asked with a smile, just you? Scamander thinks there aren't enough people. Amicus sneered, his eyes turning sinister. Why don't you show yourselves and give him a surprise? As soon as he finished speaking, 3 wizards removed their invisibility cloaks, revealing themselves. Ralph glanced at them. The one to the south was a burly man, holding a thick wand that looked like a cane. The one to the west was a skinny man with arms crossed, of average appearance, orange hair, and countless freckles densely scattered on his forehead and cheeks. The man to the north was a tall, thin, middle-aged man with a wooden expression, and a long, thin white snake clung to his shoulder. Amicus stood to the east, and the 4 of them each occupied a position, completely surrounding Rove. Amicus grinned, his eyes sinister, and said, Are these people enough to kill you? Amicus wanted to see the boy show panic, but he was quickly disappointed. Rove remained calm, a playful smirk on his lips, and sneered, 4 against 1, you'll barely be able to please me today, arrogant. The burly wizard suddenly raised his wand, which resembled a staff, and shouted, Avada Kedavra. A green light flashed, and a jet of boiling water shot towards Rove. Ralph leaned back, clinging to the giant octopus's back, narrowly escaping the death curse. He opened his mouth wide and shouted, Ink curse! A large gush of black liquid erupted from Ralph's mouth, shooting out in all directions, quickly turning the lake water black. The 4 wizards swam backward, avoiding the unknown liquid. Carlo shouted a warning, Be careful, don't let Scamander use the disillusionment charm to escape. Scamander can't escape. My little darling has locked his scent, he's still inside. The tall, thin wizard, with a small white snake, no more than half a meter long and extremely slender, perched on his shoulder, was raising its head towards the blackened liquid, frantically flicking its tongue. But the next moment, Ralph appeared before the wizard, one hand behind his back, the other gripping the wizard's neck tightly. He sneered, "When I was 9, I learned from my grandfather how to make myself disappear, so those magical creatures with keen senses of smell wouldn't detect me. Trusting animals too much isn't a good habit, you know." The wizard, his face flushed red, then turned blue and then purple. He struggled to say, "Bite him." Clara, the white snake, its tongue flicking wildly, stared at Ralph. It coiled itself high, its body suddenly tensing, ready to pounce on the hateful boy. Ralph remained unmoved, only hissing. The next second, the white snake darted out, not attacking Ralph, but opening its jaws wide and swiftly biting the wizard's neck. Ralph's lips curled into a slight smile, hissing, "Good boy." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 695 Horse-Headed Fish-Tailed Sea Monster. Instead of attacking Ralph, the snake suddenly bit Joey's neck. This turn of events shocked not only Carlo and the others, but Joey himself. The snake was his pet, raised for years, and was always extremely obedient. How could it turn on its master? Joey stared at Ralph, then suddenly remembered something and stammered, You're a parsley, you guessed right." Ralph chuckled. "Let me teach you a lesson. Snakes can never be truly tamed, unless you're a parsley. So, remember this lesson, and never play with snakes again in your next life." With that, Ralph leaned back swiftly, narrowly dodging a spell that attacked from behind. As he fell, he flipped, pulling Joey in front of him and using his body as a shield to block the ensuing barrage of spells. Joey died instantly. Even though Ralph had petrified his body, it was instantly torn to pieces by the series of magical attacks. Before the next attack, Rove's eyes gleamed with magic as he whispered, "Dazzling flash." The magic from the dazzling bird caused his eyes to instantly erupt with a blinding, brilliant white light, shooting out in all directions. For a moment, not only were Carlo and his companions temporarily blinded, but even the students in the audience, seeing the light through the magical curtain, felt a stinging pain in their eyes and quickly closed them. After losing their sight, Carlo and his friends cast protective spells to guard against Rove's sneak attack. The skinny, monkey-like man named Nachi was also busy chanting spells and waving his wand. Soon, a string of shimmering ancient magical runes appeared around him, wide and bright, connecting end to end to form a full moon, protecting him within. Furthermore, a small water snake made of lake water appeared in the air, rapidly spinning around him. The man's specially made robe emitted a 5-colored light, which then sprayed out like a spring, enveloping Nachi. Inside and out, top and bottom, layer upon layer of defense, a multitude of survival measures. Loki amused Rolf. It felt like locking a bicycle. Everyone else uses one lock, but this guy uses 7 or 8. Such an obvious bag, not stealing him would be a disservice to the profession of thief. So, Rolf, who had initially intended to deal with Carlo first, instantly changed his mind and went to Loki's side first. Loki, temporarily blind, couldn't see his surroundings clearly, but sensed the danger and continued to cast protective spells on himself. Rolf laughed. "You're quite afraid of dying, aren't you? Good, then I'll add some more protection for you." He raised his arm and pressed it forward into the air, saying in a deep voice, "Azure Prison." Wisps of water appeared around him, quickly flowing towards Loki, eventually forming a several-meter-high emerald green water sphere, trapping him inside. When Loki barely regained his vision and saw the scene before him, he was utterly horrified, his soul nearly leaving his body. He found himself trapped inside a giant water sphere. Scamander floated above it, and with a flick of his wrist, palm down, gently touched the sphere. Water continuously flowed into the sphere, forming water-shaped sharks that swam freely, their eyes fixed on Loki. Loki was caught in a dilemma. If he dispelled his defensive magic, he would be attacked by the sharks. If he didn't, he would be trapped in place. A prison within himself, this was it. Meanwhile, the students in the stand slowly regained their vision. They saw the dead Joey, then the trapped Loki. Even the slow-witted young wizards understood, this wasn't a true wizard tournament, but a real assassination attempt. Some looked at each other in disbelief, Some were bewildered, and others screamed in terror. The entire stands descended into chaos. Professor Dumbledore had to raise his wand, which produced a piercing firework explosion, and said in a low voice, "Don't worry, everyone, wizards have been dispatched to provide support immediately." Hearing the headmaster's words, many students slowly calmed down. The students were calm, but Carlo and the burly man named Caswell were not. In just one exchange, Scamander had instantly killed one person and trapped another, reducing the enemy's forces to 2/3. Although they still had a numerical advantage, Carlo felt that he was the one at a disadvantage. In other words, he felt that he was surrounded by Scamander. Carlo was already regretting coming here. Looking at the silent Carlo, Ralph sneered, "It's your turn, are you ready to die?" Carlo looked at Caswell and shouted, "Why aren't you letting that guy out?" Caswell nodded, grabbed the shiny black horn with silver trim hanging from his chest, put it to his lips, and blew it hard. Then, a deep, resonant horn sound echoed throughout the Black Lake. It was a long, booming roar, trembling across the water and reverberating in all directions. The sound faded, eventually ending in silence. A deafening roar followed, and soon a colossal beast, like an arrow, swam swiftly from afar. The students, seeing the beast clearly through the magical veil, were utterly stunned. It was a gigantic magical creature, easily over 10 meters long. Its head and forebody resembled a horse, while its tail and hind body resembled a large fish. Overall, it looked remarkably like a giant seahorse, the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster. The horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster is a magical creature originating from Greece. Wherever they appear, giant waves always accompany them, hence they are also known as monsters that control the waves. Like the Thestrals, the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster possesses the ability to orient itself, so for a long time, they were used as mounts by wizards. At this moment, as Rove stared at the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster, a sudden ding sounded in his mind. One domesticated horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster detected, triggering side quest 1, capture the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster, reward magic, stormy waves, can control a body of water, creating giant waves. The larger the waves, the more magic power is required. Side quest 2, 100% tame the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster, reward magic, sea monster navigation, possesses the same special ability to recognize directions as the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster, and will never lose its way in the ocean. Quest incomplete. Caswell landed on the head of the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster. His eyes filled with ferocity. He commanded the monster, "Kabu! Eat Scamander!" The horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster glared at Rove with its cold eyes, larger than lanterns. As it swung its enormous tail, the surrounding lake water rippled violently, sending towering waves crashing onto the surface. Chapter 696 Missera, Long Time No See. As the sea monster with the head of a horse and the tail of a fish shook its massive body, the Black Lake instantly surged and churned, creating enormous waves. In an instant, the undercurrents beneath the surface surged, the water cascading down in layers, violently tossing Rolf around. The turbulence was more intense than any flying broomstick he had ever ridden. The giant octopus, which had already used its mimicry ability to transform into seaweed, wrapped around Neville, who trembled as it lay on the lake bed. All its tentacles clung tightly to the rocks to prevent being swept away by the raging current. The giant octopus wasn't swept away, but the massive amount of silt quickly buried it completely. Loki was smug. The defensive magic that had just been somewhat like a self-imposed prison, now, under the impact of the raging torrent, though swaying violently, stood firm like a reef in the middle of a flood. This became Loki's best refuge. As Caswell and Carlo swam by on their horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster, Loki smiled and waved at them, seemingly unfazed by the crashing waves. But the next second, the sea monster swung its massive tail, slamming it down on Loki. A brief silence followed, then a deafening bang, shattering the water sphere and defensive magic with a single, powerful blow. Loki, stunned, was struck by the sea monster. His chest caved in instantly, and a large chunk bulged out of his back, clearly broken. Loki's body flew upwards, spinning 7 or 8 times in the water. Before he could even stop, the sea monster bit him. With a slight pull, its sharp teeth severed Loki's body, and his upper torso, cut in half, plummeted to the bottom of the lake with a mournful cry. This bloody and cruel scene startled not only the students watching through the magical veil, but even Carlo, standing atop the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster. However, the sea monster's master, Casway, seemed unconcerned. Although he and Rocky were summoned by Carlo, they weren't familiar with each other. Therefore, it wasn't a big deal for his hungry sea monster to devour Rocky. The horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster chewed on the corpse, emitting eerie sounds. After finishing, it swung its tail again, striking the water heavily like a sword, charging towards the boy in the distance. Many students in the audience screamed again, and some young wizards covered their eyes, as if Rove would suffer the same tragic fate as Rocky in the next second. Rove's mind raced. He was about to use the basilisk's death gaze to kill the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster when he suddenly heard a song. The song drifted from the distant waters, melodious and clear, like heavenly music. In an instant, not only Rove, but also Carlo, Casway, even the incredibly volatile horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster stopped what they were doing and listened quietly. The woman's voice, like a stone thrown into a lake, instantly spread out in a magnificent ripple, engulfing the students in the audience. Many students' minds went blank, feeling only an extreme joy, as if nothing else in the world mattered, as long as they could keep listening to the song. After a few seconds of immersion, Rove's eyes cleared instantly. He turned his head and looked into the distance, seeing a blurry figure swimming rapidly towards him. The boy's lips curled slightly. Although he hadn't heard it in a long time, he immediately recognized a person with that highly recognizable voice. Rove looked away and back at the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster, whose eyes were still tightly closed, unable to move, absorbed in the song. Rove certainly wouldn't miss such a good opportunity. He didn't use his death stare again, but instead assumed a stance as if he were about to throw a spear. The lake water surged instantly like a tidal wave. Immediately afterward, an ice spear several meters long condensed, and as the boy made a throwing motion, he said in a deep voice, "Go." The ice spear pierced the lake water and shot towards the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster. Rove continued to condense ice spears, and soon they rained down on the water, almost simultaneously launching towards the area where the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster was located. At the same time, Carlo and Casway had also regained their senses. Carlo listened intently to the song, his face grave. "That's a mermaid's song. Did we disturb the mermaids in the mermaid village?" Casway, however, didn't seem too concerned. With a horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster around, they weren't afraid of any number of mermaids. But he quickly realized that the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster was still immersed in the song and hadn't recovered. Casway shouted loudly, but before he could wake the monster, he heard a whooshing sound. He looked up and saw a row of ice spears shooting towards him at lightning speed. Carlo, standing nearby, felt a chill run down his spine. Without a second thought, he broke free from the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster and swam away. Casway, unwilling to give up, raised his wand high, continuously casting spells to destroy the ice spears, but there were simply too many to destroy them all. A row of ice spears pierced the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster's body at an angle, instantly splattering blood and filling the lake with a bloody stench. The pain instantly jolted the sea monster awake, its howl was deafening, and it frantically twisted its body, throwing Carlo away. The deafening roar also startled the young wizards who were immersed in the mermaid's song. They looked at the magical curtain in horror, only to find that in their moment of distraction, the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster was actually impaled with more than a dozen ice spears, struggling in agony. Suddenly, the black lake churned violently, shaking violently, and a giant wave crashed against the shore, soaking the group of students watching the competition. Castor, flung into the air, finally regained his footing. Just as he was about to chase after the horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster, a spell shot out and struck him. Castor slammed into the lakebed like a cannonball, plunging headfirst into the mud. Castor expected to be badly injured, if not broken, but to his astonishment, he was unharmed and caught by something elastic. As he wondered what was supporting him, a tentacle wrapped around his neck. A giant octopus emerged from the mud, glaring menacingly at Castor, and shoved him into its mouth. "If I can't eat Scamander, I can eat you." Seeing this, Carlo was terrified. He no longer cared about Castor's life or killing Scamander, all he wanted was to escape. He pulled a glass ball from his pocket, an illegal key that, once activated, would take him away from the Black Lake. But the next second, a red light shot out, and the key shattered into pieces. Carlo raised his head, staring intently at Rolf. The boy toyed with his wand, smiling slightly, I thought the four of you combined could give me some fun, but I was wrong. I didn't expect you to be so easily defeated." Carlo, enraged, raised his wand again. He had only uttered half of Avada Kedavra when he suddenly felt a jet of water strike his back. Carlo spat out a mouthful of blood and flew backward several meters. Before losing consciousness, his blurred vision vaguely saw a figure appear beside Scamander. In an instant, all the students simultaneously widened their eyes, staring at the unexpected guest. It was a mermaid, but not the ugly mermaid of the Black Lake, but a beautiful golden, two-tailed mermaid. Ralph gazed at the mermaid and smiled slightly. "Missira, long time no see." Chapter 697. Missira, have you found Avalon? After the battle, Moody finally arrived at the scene with several staff members from the Department of Magical Sports. To say they were late wouldn't be accurate. Ralph's battle had just ended, and they were already collecting the bodies. They were practically on time. What? They weren't there to collect the Death Eater's corpses, but to support Ralph? Well, sorry to bother you. However, Moody wasn't too embarrassed by his lateness. After all, being late was a long-standing tradition among Aurors. He asked in a gruff, deep voice, "Child, are you alright?" "No, Professor Moody." Ralph floated in the water, glancing at the mad eye with bubbles above his head, and asked, "Did you look for Carol at the bottom of the lake?" "We found her, Mr. Scamander," a young witch said excitedly. Seeing the boy looking at her, she quickly introduced herself. "Hello, my name is Uma Penniman. I'm an employee of the Department of Magical Sports, currently in charge of coordinating the Tree Wizard Tournament." Uma rattled off her job, age, and even home address as if she were giving a household registration. She seemed to realize she had talked too much and said somewhat embarrassedly, "I'm sorry, Mr. Scamander. I'm an admirer of yours and have always liked you, so I'm a little excited. Thank you for your appreciation." "Don't be nervous, relax," Ralph said with a smile. He then reminded her, "Don't bother looking for Rocky and Casway. They were eaten by the horse-headed fish-tailed sea monster and the giant octopus, respectively. So, apart from Amicus Caro, the other three wizards are all dead?" Moody asked gruffly. "Yes." Uma looked at Ralph with admiration, her eyes filled with worship. Ambushed by four dark wizards, yet still managing to kill three and seriously injure one, truly worthy of being called Scamander. Moody was already aware of Ralph's strength and wasn't surprised at all, only somewhat impressed by his genius. He narrowed his asymmetrical eyes again, staring suspiciously at Missira, who was calming the horse-headed fish-tailed sea monster in the distance. One of her eyes was small and black, with a bright gaze, while the other was large and round, flashing with an electric blue light. "And who is this?" "Her name is Marcella," Ralph said. "She's my friend. Can you be sure this is her, Ralph?" Moody asked suspiciously. "How could she just happen to be here? Could she be a Death Eater using Polyjuice Potion to impersonate her?" "You'd better ask her directly, only the two of you would know. I've already confirmed it," Ralph chuckled. A mermaid's voice can't be faked. Seeing that Moody was still uneasy and seemed to want to interrogate him personally, Ralph quickly said, "Professor Moody, the Tree Wizard Tournament isn't over yet. I need to go now. Goodbye." Moody nodded, while Uma watched the boy depart with reluctance. After saying goodbye to Mad Eye, Ralph, with a still sleeping Neville, continued his journey back aboard the giant octopus. Marcella followed. The last time they parted was 2 years ago, in the summer. Now, after such a long separation, they had so much to talk about. Standing on the judge's platform, Ludo's voice echoed across Black Lake. He exclaimed excitedly, "Oh, it seems the source of Scamander's golden scales has been found. It probably comes from the mermaid beside him. Everyone's in for a treat today, to witness a golden double-tailed mermaid firsthand. They are extremely rare. Seldom seen in the wizarding world. Speaking of which, this mermaid is truly beautiful," Ludo exclaimed. "Rumor has it that their beauty rivals that of Vila, and it seems that's not a rumor." Ludo's praise was echoed by all the students, many of the boys staring at Marcella with infatuated eyes. She looked only 17 or 18, wearing a silver seaweed-woven dress, with a slender figure and flowing, curly blonde hair that danced lightly in the water, her skin flawlessly white. Even more captivating were her two golden fishtails below her hips, which thrilled certain individuals with unusual tastes. This was a true mermaid. The mermaids in Black Lake? Ugly mutants. But just as everyone was enjoying the view, the image on the magic screen suddenly cut off, filling the audience with angry roars. "Looks like Scamander deliberately blocked the monitors again," Ludo joked. He probably has something private to do with that beautiful mermaid, something he can't let anyone see. Alright, let's look at the other warriors. Swinton has rescued Padma Petal, becoming the second warrior to return. Granger is currently fighting that rune-veined serpent in the 4th level. Ludo guessed correctly. Ralph did indeed have something private to do. He needed to examine Myrcella. After confirming that no one else was around, Myrcella, sitting atop the giant octopus's head, turned her back to Ralph and shyly removed her upper garment, revealing a perfectly curved, flawless white body. On her snow-white back was a striking gray scale. This was the curse unique to the golden twin-tailed mermaid, grayscale disease. Myrcella, her back to Ralph, asked sadly, "Has the area expanded considerably?" Ralph reached out and gently stroked the skin of Myrcella's back, sighing, "Yes, 2 years ago, when he first saw this gray scale, it was only the size of a mung bean, but now it had spread to the size of a palm. At this rate, in a few more years, Myrcella's entire back would probably be covered in gray scales." But this was the characteristic of gray scale disease. It would slowly erode from the back to the buttocks, neck, and thighs over time, until the entire body was covered in gray scales, and finally, death. This disease, which only appeared in golden-tailed female mermaids, was incurable, and no one knew its cause. However, when Ralph returned 1,000 years ago, he had asked a Gryffindor professor familiar with mermaids. According to him, this gray-scale disease originated from the 3 sirens of Avalon. Persolope. Persolope fell in love with the ancient Greek wizard Odysseus, and when Odysseus's ship left Avalon, Persolope followed. The 3 sirens had sworn to remain on the island forever, guarding a treasure. Persephone broke her oath and was cursed for eternity. After Persephone's death, this curse continued to her descendant, the golden, two-tailed mermaid. Ralph gazed at Myrcella's snow-white back, remained silent for a moment, and softly asked, "So, Myrcella, did you find Avalon using the nautical map I gave you?" Myrcella put her clothes back on, covered her collar, nodded gently, and said in a low voice, "I found it." Chapter 698 The Mysterious Avalon. 2 years ago, Ralph was traveling to America on the Mayflower when he encountered a ghost ship. On the ship, he found a nautical chart depicting the exact location of Avalon. Ralph used magic to create a replica of the chart and gave it to Myrcella, hoping it would guide her to the legendary island. So, upon hearing that Myrcella had indeed found Avalon, Ralph was overjoyed but also somewhat puzzled. If she had found the island, why hadn't her grayscale disease been healed? "Although I found Avalon," Myrcella turned around, gazing at Ralph with her golden eyes, her voice soft and sorrowful. "I couldn't set foot on that island." "You couldn't go?" Ralph frowned. "Yes, I only caught a glimpse of it from afar, and then I missed it," Myrcella said in a low voice. Ralph didn't speak, quietly listening to Myrcella recount what had happened to her. "After we parted ways that year, I recuperated in the tribe for a year. Last summer, after making all the necessary preparations, I set off for the North Sea. Following the nautical chart, I arrived at the waters where Avalon was located, but I couldn't find the island. I searched the North Sea for months, enduring until winter without success. Just as I was about to give up, Myrcella paused for a moment, then said softly, "Suddenly, I encountered a ghost ship. It was completely corroded, covered in rust, and towing a wooden coffin at its stern." Ralph said, "It was the ghost ship I encountered on the Mayflower." "Yes," Myrcella nodded. "I thought the nautical chart also came from that ship, so, almost by chance, I boarded it to see where it was heading." Myrcella stared at the lake for a long time, unblinking, before slowly saying, "The ghost ship drifted through a fog all night, and finally, through the fog, I saw an island. I intended to dive into the water and swim towards the island, but suddenly I heard a song, faint and distant, yet unmistakably, it was the song of a mermaid." Myrcella crossed her arms and said, "The sound rose and fell, like a mournful and lonely ballad, giving me goosebumps. I felt as if a pair of eyes were staring at me from the shadows. When I came to my senses, the ghost ship had already moved far away from Avalon and re-entered the mist. The ghost ship passed through the mist, and Avalon simply vanished." Myrcella sighed. "I sat on the ghost ship, watching it gradually sail out of the North Sea, and finally had to leave the ship to come to Hogwarts to find you." After listening to Myrcella's words, Ralph silently processed the information. It seemed that the waters near Avalon were protected by magic, making it invisible to muggles and wizards, accessible only by ghost ships. "What are your plans now?" Ralph asked. "I plan to stay here for a while, and then go to the North Sea in the summer, Myrcella said, looking at Ralph. I'll keep waiting there. One day, that ghost ship will reappear, then stay here, Rove said after a moment's thought. Don't go to the mermaid village at Black Lake, it's not safe there. Stay in my trunk instead. That summer, Myrcella's whereabouts were revealed by the mermaids of Black Lake, and she was captured by the wizard and sold to a mysterious circus. If Rove hadn't rescued Myrcella in time, who knows how she would have been tortured. That's what I thought too, Myrcella smiled sweetly. Rove looked into the distance and said, we're almost at the shore. Go find that horse-headed, fish-tailed sea monster first. I'll come find you after the competition. Okay, I'll wait for you, Myrcella said, and swam away. Rove gestured for the giant octopus to float to the surface of the lake. As they surfaced, Neville, who had been unconscious, finally awoke. He spat out a mouthful of lake water, shivered, and hurriedly asked, Rover, how's the race? We're almost at the finish line, still in first place. Rover carefully stored the scales away, then snapped his fingers. Neville's wet robes instantly evaporated with magic. Great, Neville laughed happily. This morning, Professor McGonagall called me to her office, saying she was going to hypnotize us and make us hostages for the second project. I was even trying to sneak a peek at you while I was in the bathroom, but Professor McGonagall saw through my plan. Rover laughed too. The giant octopus suddenly let out a strange cry, startling Neville. He looked down and asked nervously, what is that? I caught a vehicle in the Black Lake, Ralph said. Don't be nervous, this giant octopus is quite docile and won't attack you, Neville breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, he saw the giant octopus spit something out of its mouth. He picked it up and frowned. This is, Ralph glanced at it and calmly said, a spine. What animal's spine? A wizard's. Ralph and Neville rode the giant octopus and quickly reached the shore. When people saw them appear, cheers immediately erupted and quickly spread throughout the stands. Everyone cheered and applauded for Ralph, and the young wizards were still chanting his name. From the judges' stand, Ludo announced loudly, Scamander is the first warrior to arrive, taking a total of 53 minutes. If he hadn't been attacked by the Dark Wizard, he could have arrived even earlier. Ludo's voice was amplified many times by magic, but it was barely noticeable amidst the deafening cheers. Ralph smiled and gracefully bowed to the audience. This made the students even more frenzied, and several witches even jumped down from the stands, running towards Ralph like mad women. The Ministry of Magic staff maintaining security immediately tried to stop them. But one female student broke through the blockade, running breathlessly to Ralph's side. She took out a lipstick, pulled down her collar, revealing her snow-white shoulder, and asked Ralph to sign it with the lipstick. When the staff arrived, the girl clung tightly to Ralph, refusing to let go, tearing the boy's robes in the process. This is insane, Ludo remarked, reminiscing at the scene. When I was young, it was pretty much the same scene when I dominated the Quidditch match against Turkey, helping England qualify for the Quidditch World Cup, but Madame Pomfrey didn't seem too happy. As she pulled Ralph and Neville towards the tent, she exclaimed, 7 girls have already fainted from excitement. 7. Then, Madame Pomfrey began to complain about how dangerous the Triwizard Tournament was and how incompetent Dumbledore was. Just as they reached the tent, Ralph suddenly stopped. He looked at the witch blocking the path in the distance, a smirk playing on his lips, and said, Electo Carlo, are you here to collect your brother's corpse? Chapter 699 The Real and Fake Voldemort. Hearing Ralph's sarcastic words, Electo Carlo was instantly enraged. She stared intently at the boy, her eyes seeming capable of killing. Hand over my brother right now, you've got the wrong person, haven't you? Ralph said with a grin. Your brother is with Mad-Eye Moody. You should go ask him for him. Before Alex could speak, Ralph let out a long "oh," and said, you don't know where Professor Moody is, do you? He's in the Defense Against the Dark Arts office, Ralph said with utmost helpfulness. Go up the castle stairs to the 3rd floor, the 7th room from the west. You're welcome, Alex, of course, didn't thank Ralph. She didn't move an inch, still staring intently at the boy, her voice hoarse as she said, I want you to come with me. That won't do, Ralph refused. I have to participate in the scoring phase of the Triwizard Tournament. I don't have time to go with you to hear your brother's last words. Hearing the word last words, Alex grew even angrier. She roared, what if I insist you go? Ralph narrowed his eyes, staring coldly at Alex, and suddenly laughed. You're not planning to capture me and then exchange me for your brother with Professor Moody, are you? I do intend to. Alexius extended his arm from his sleeve, pointing his wand at Ralph's chest. Ralph's smile widened. As he walked towards Alexius, he asked, Alexius Caro, even your brother with 3 dark wizards couldn't defeat me. Do you think you can catch me with that little stick in your hand? I told you not to move. Alexius gripped his wand tightly, his voice menacing. You still have a use. I don't want to kill you. Oh, is that so? Ralph chuckled. Come on, let me see how you're going to kill me. The boy opened his arms, facing the wand, and approached Alexius step by step, his pace unhurried, a faint smile playing on his lips. This audacious, even insane, behavior terrified Neville and Madame Pomfrey. They knew Alexius Caro was a Death Eater who had killed countless people. A surge of intense rage flashed across Alexius's pale, doe-like face. She was a Death Eater, the kind of wizard she'd personally killed over a decade ago, and yet today she was being so utterly disrespected. You brat! Alexius was about to unleash the Cruciatus curse to teach Scamander a painful lesson, but the next second, she froze, her face contorted with terror. Scamander had vanished, replaced by a tall, thin man. He had a grotesque face, large, bloodshot eyes, a flat, snake-like nose with narrow slits at the nostrils. Master, Alexius cried out in disbelief. Although she hadn't seen this figure in over a decade, she recognized him instantly. It was Voldemort. Madame Pomfrey felt the same way. She screamed in terror. The barefoot, noseless man didn't speak. He simply stared at Alexius with his crimson eyes, letting out a cold, piercing laugh. Alex was terrified. She stood frozen, her arms trembling uncontrollably. Forget using the Cruciatus curse, even gripping her wand was difficult. The man quickly moved in front of Alex, grabbing her right wrist with his left hand and pulling her towards him. He then delivered a powerful knee strike to her abdomen. The swift blow nearly made Alex vomit bile, her body involuntarily contorting. The man ripped Alex's wand from her hand, then raised his arm and grabbed her neck, slowly lifting her into the air. At this moment, the Dark Lord who Alex feared so much vanished, and in her vision, the man transformed back into Ralph. Alex convulsed, kicked, and struggled like a captured snake, but to no avail. Her legs continued to rise. Before Alex could suffocate, Ralph kicked her in the ribs, sending her crashing to the ground. Ralph walked up to Alexius, knelt down, grabbed her hair, and pulled it upwards, asking, Do you still want me to go with you to find your brother? Alexius, her face covered in blood, pleaded tremblingly, Release Amicus, and I'll give you anything you want. We have countless amounts of gold in our vault. Ralph suddenly turned to Neville and asked, Neville, what do you think? Should we agree to her? In the original timeline, Voldemort controlled Hogwarts and brought the Carroll siblings to the school as professors. They used the Cruciatus curse on disobedient students, and Neville was the biggest victim, even forced to hide in the room of requirement. Therefore, the mischievous Ralph decided to hand over the reins of the Carroll siblings' fate to Neville. Neville hesitated for a moment, then stammered, Rover, no, we absolutely can't let them go. I heard from my grandmother that the Carroll siblings are Death Eaters. My neighbors, the Felon family, were killed by them back then, and Uncle Master's legs were broken by them too. Did you hear that? Rover looked at Alex and sneered. You killed so many innocent people back then, and now you want to exchange gold for their lives? Does such a good thing exist in this world? Of course, I won't kill you, because you'll die in the second project, and your brother will die from the backlash of the Goblet of Fire for missing the True Wizard Tournament. After saying this, Rover stood up and kicked Alex in the back of the head, slamming her head into the ground. Rover turned and walked towards Neville. Seeing Madame Pomfrey staring at him in terror, he knew that Voldemort had definitely frightened her. That was normal. Who wouldn't be afraid of a Voldemort suddenly appearing? That was obviously a fake Voldemort, created by Ralph using bog art magic. Boggarts, as magical creatures, can transform into anything anyone fears. And Alexius' greatest fear was Voldemort, which is why Ralph transformed into Tom's form when facing her. Ralph hadn't expected that Alexius' greatest fear would be her master. Wait, for most Death Eaters, their greatest fear is probably the Dark Lord, right? Ralph's eyes darted around, and a bold idea suddenly occurred to him. Could he impersonate Voldemort in front of Death Eaters and make them kneel and kiss his toes? Michael Gambon, who played Dumbledore, passed away yesterday, searching for Hagrid in the Mystic Realm. For those with clear minds, death is merely another great adventure. Dumbledore. May Gambon board a train to Hogwarts in another world. Respectfully. Chapter 700 Mermaid. Madame Pomfrey thoroughly examined Ralph inside and out, confirming he was unharmed before allowing him to leave. However, Ralph strongly suspected that she was actually trying to confirm whether he was Voldemort in disguise after taking Polyjuice Potion, hence the meticulous examination. After the checkup, Ralph returned to Hogwarts Castle to retrieve his black trunk before returning to the Black Lake. At that moment, Sherry arrived at the shore with Padma Pettier, becoming the second warrior to complete the race. Sherry surfaced and climbed to the shore, her entire body soaked through, strands of hair clinging to her cheeks, a string of water droplets sliding down her flawless, snow-white skin. Ralph draped a thick cloak over the ponytail-wearing girl, who wiped the light water from her chin and asked softly, "How long did it take me?" 56 minutes. Ralph helped Sherry tighten the cloak, then extended his right index finger and gently tapped her brow. In an instant, wisps of mist appeared around the girl, and the water droplets on her body quickly evaporated, turning into wisps of steam. Shirley smoothed her disheveled hair, somewhat dissatisfied, and said, "I lingered too long at the rune serpent level. I made a mistake, I didn't attack its left head first." Ralph smiled slightly at the girl and said, "It's alright, even with a delay, you're still second." "How are Hermione and Fleur?" "They've rescued the hostages and are returning," Ralph said. Sherry looked up at the magic curtain, and after confirming their positions, she looked away and whispered in the boy's ear, "Ralph, I heard a mermaid's song on the way." The voice sounded familiar, like Missera. "It is Missera," Ralph smiled. "I've already met her." The boy quickly recounted what had happened. When he heard that he had been attacked by Carlo and the others, the usually gentle Sherry seemed to have her sore spot touched, her face filled with anger. "Are we just going to let them go like this?" "Of course not." Ralph stroked the girl's ponytail and smiled. "The Carlo siblings will both die in the second event of the Triwizard Tournament. I'll have the mermaid leader, Mercus, give them a good welcome." From the judge's stand, Ludo announced in a loud voice, "Granger and Delacour are swimming towards the shore with their respective rescued treasures. They are very close together, and there's no significant difference in their positions yet." Krum was chasing the two, and he was very fast, but unfortunately Granger and Delacour were too close to the shore for him to catch up. Besides, the other warriors haven't rescued the hostages yet, they're all trapped inside the building, and the magical creatures in those levels seem to be struggling against them. It was more than just struggling, Harry felt he might not make it out alive. In the first room, he was poisoned by the Lobabe venom. Although he didn't die, his body was weak, and his stomach was burning. In the second room, Harry was pricked in the thigh by Grindelwald's long, thin fingers. If he hadn't dodged in time, he might have been a lone egg. In the third room, Harry easily dealt with a Kelpie using the methods taught by Grapple, but in the fourth room, the runaboding serpent was a different story. Just as Harry was wondering what to do, several more warriors entered. The number of runaboding serpents increased to 3, then stopped increasing. In an instant, all the warriors, regardless of school, united to fight the rune like snakes. They finally managed to get through the room and rescue the hostages. But as soon as they left the building, the warriors, who had just been united, scattered like birds and beasts, frantically swimming towards the shore. Everyone was now on the same starting line. Whoever reached the shore first would have a better result, so of course they had to fight desperately. Harry thought the same way. Even though he was poisoned, he had to swim to the shore with his roommate Seamus Finnegan. Just as Harry was about to leave, he suddenly saw Ron, who was hiding behind a mermaid statue in the center of the square, fighting Durmstrang's warriors. Around the two of them floated a large group of mermaids, watching their passionate exchange of arrows and bursting with laughter. Harry had no choice but to put Seamus down and swim towards the two of them. He quietly swam behind Polyako, hiding among the mermaids, and shouted, "Stun!" A dazzling red light, accompanied by a jet of water, struck Polyako, who fell straight forward. Ron exclaimed with delight. Harry swam towards Ron, curious, "How did you end up fighting with Durmstrang's warrior?" "I stole the gift he was giving to the mermaid statue," Ron explained. "This guy came to the square to guard me." "Did you just arrive here?" Harry was momentarily dazed. He seemed to have asked Ron a similar question not long ago. So, after a moment of silence, Harry imitated Ron, saying in an extremely calm tone, "No, I've completed the second part and am now heading back to shore." Seeing Ron's shocked expression, Harry instantly felt good. Was this what it felt like to show off? So satisfying. Harry wanted to impart some experience to Ron as an experienced person, but suddenly he found it difficult to breathe. It felt like being in a thin-walled environment, unable to breathe oxygen. Harry thought it was a symptom of being poisoned by lobabe venom, but Ron beside him was also breathing heavily, his face flushed red. Harry immediately realized with horror that it wasn't the lobabe venom that was the problem, but rather the water-breathing potion wearing off. Ludo also noticed this strange scene and asked in bewilderment, "What's wrong with Potter and Weasley? They both seem unable to breathe." Snape, sitting in the Slytherin stands, wore a smug smile. Harry held his breath, turned to Seamus, then looked up at the lake. He was already weak from the lobabe venom, and trying to swim from the bottom of the lake to the surface with Seamus was simply a pipe dream. Harry, filled with despair, could only pull Ron towards Mercus, the mermaid leader, desperately pointing to his nose and pleading for help. "We can't help," Mercus said in a hoarse, deep voice, "unless you two forfeit the match immediately." Harry, of course, could agree. He had already rescued Seamus. How could he abandon the match at this crucial moment? Ron was even more unwilling. He had borrowed 5 galleons, betting on himself to win. To give up now would mean losing everything. The situation froze for a moment. Mercus suddenly laughed. "Actually, there's another way," pointing to a group of extremely ugly merwomen in the distance, she said in a hoarse voice. "It's my original suggestion. They can help you breathe underwater, and even help you surpass the other warriors to reach the shore quickly. However, after the competition, you must return and mate with one of them to produce wizard mermaid offspring." Harry looked at the merwomen. They were so ugly, iron-gray skin, long, tangled, dark green hair, and yellow eyes. Forget mating, just looking at them would make him explode. Harry would rather sleep in the same bed as Snape than be with the merwomen. But Harry quickly felt the carbon dioxide accumulating in his blood due to lack of oxygen, triggering his instinct to breathe. He knew he was about to reach his limit. If this continued, he would drown. Harry and Ron exchanged a glance, both understanding each other's thoughts. First, they had to fool the merwomen. If they never went near the Black Lake again, would they still be able to come ashore and capture people? Harry and Ron, having made up their minds, immediately nodded in agreement. The students in the audience erupted in murmurs. If the Black Lake mermaids looked like golden double-tailed mermaids, probably everyone would agree, but looking at these ugly creatures, Harry and Ron really weren't picky. Ludo, speaking from experience, said meaningfully, "Actually, it's not such a difficult choice, is it? Anyway, it's all the same with the lights off." Seeing the two agree, Mercus immediately clapped his hands and said, "All right, ladies, who wants to mate with these two? Come out now." The mermaids whispered amongst themselves for a moment, covering their mouths, before finally 2 mermaids swam out. Harry wondered how the mermaids helped them breathe underwater. Was it through magic, herbs, or potions? Just as Harry was filled with doubt, a mermaid swam towards him, grinning to reveal a set of crooked, jagged yellow teeth, and said shyly, "Let's kiss, and you can breathe the oxygen from my mouth." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.